Doctors, we are live now.
Hey, I'm ready.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are happy to host this live session, which will focus mainly on the future of what we call interprofessional education development and how this reflects in the current situation of the post-COVID dilemma that we are all living. I just want to go over the coming program with all of you very, very briefly. We have the first hour is a panel discussion that I hope all of you will enjoy. And when we say panel, we mean panel by every meaning of that word. We have opposing views, we have people of different walks of life, and we are expecting a huge discussion that will be very fruitful and useful to all of you. The second hour will focus on assessment, where we will be featuring Jack Boulay and John Norsini. And the third hour will basically be focusing on faculty development in the interprofessional world. So please stick with us, stay with us till 6:30. And having said that, I just want to start the first session, which is the panel discussion. And I want to introduce our panel for today. First, our chairs for today. We have Professor Dr. Ashraf Omar, the Dean of our university at Ain Shams Medical School. Happy to have you with us. We have Professor Dr. Safinaz Al-Habashi, who is a quality expert who has been with us for years and who is responsible for many of the achievements of our faculty in the area of quality and accreditation. Very happy to have her with us as our amazing chair. And we also have Professor Dr. Sana Aradi, who is the vice chair of the of NACAI, which is the National Authority for Quality Assurance and Accreditation in Education. Happy to have her with us as well. And having said that, I want to turn it over to Professor Dr. Ashraf Omar to start this session.
Good afternoon, everybody. On the behalf of Faculty of Medicine and Shams University staff members, I wish you all best of health in the current COVID pandemic, which despite its deleterious effects on the globe, have empowered us to communicate via webinars to exchange knowledge and update our treatment plans for patients. And for the benefit of our students, I would like to express my gratitude to all health workers all over the world, doctors, nurses, pharmacists, and transporters, technicians. They have placed themselves in the path of the virus to save our lives in this unprecedented crisis. I wish to see you all at the premises of Ain Shams University Medical College next year, to be with us next year. And in September, we are holding the Medical Congress for Faculty of Medicine and Shams University. We will update you by the dates. Hope that this crisis will end soon and we can see you in Egypt next year. Thanks for all of you.
Thank you, Professor Ashraf. And I want to hand it over to Professor Dr. Safinaz Al-Habashi to reintroduce herself. Maybe I missed some of her great achievements. And after she introduces herself again, I would like her to kindly start with the introduction of our amazing panelists. You're muted, Dr. Safi.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dr. Samar, for this intro. I won't add any for my biblio. You mentioned already everything. Thank you so much. I'm a professor of pediatrics at Ain Shams University, basically. Now it's time to introduce our really amazing guests. I'll start with Paige Morahan. Dr. Paige is the founding director of the Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine, ILAM, and the co-director of the Foundation for Advancement of International Medical Education and Research, Famer Institute. In addition, she's a tenured professor in microbiology and immunology at Drexel University College of Medicine in Philadelphia. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Page, say hello to participants. Say hello. Now, would you please open your mic?
Happy to be here.
Okay. Now I'll move to the second guest speaker, William Burdick. Nice to meet you, Dr. Bill, again. He's the former Associate Vice President for Education at the FAMR. And he's a clinical professor of emergency medicine at Drexel University College of Medicine and has been recognized for teaching excellence with double awards, the Lindback Award and the Trustees Award. Nice to meet you both. Now it's your turn, Dr. Samar, to introduce Professor Janet.
Yes, and actually I asked to introduce Janet because she is my dear friend. I said, no, please, Dr. Safi, can you let me introduce Janet? And she said, okay, she agreed. She gave me this opportunity. And I want to tell you who Janet is. So Janet is an educational psychologist and the director of CENMEDIC, which is the Center of Medical Education in Context. And she's also responsible for the FAMR Center for Distance Learning in London. She is an honorary professor in the University College London Medical School, UCL. She's a senior scholar, Department of Medical Education, University of Illinois. She is also lots of other things, but above that, she is a progressive thinker. She is someone who has her own opinion, and we love her for that opinion. And we'd like you all to just try to admire with us the person that Janet is, in addition to the person that Paige is and the person that Bill is for this coming hour. I can see Jack Boulay in the audience, so I just want to say hi to Jack, and we will be introducing Jack in the second hour. But for now, I'll turn it over back to Dr. Safi. Have we now introduced all our panelists, Dr. Safi? Is there someone else we need to introduce?
I don't know if Professor Mahmoud Al-Mitaini is with us or not. I can see him.
You can't see him. I don't think
Yes.
he's among the panelists. So
He will not be able to participate. He is in the OR.
okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
No problem. We send all our love and all our support for him in his mission as a physician. And we just want to introduce him despite the fact that he is not here. And you all know Professor Mahmoud Al-Mitaini is our president. He is a part of this panel despite his inability to be here. And he is, of course, the president of the university and one of the outstanding figures in liver transplantation in the world. So we are very proud to have him as the president of our university. And we send all our hopes for a great operation that he is holding at the moment. We're going to start today our panel happily. And we really want to get into the mood or the mode of discussion of international collaboration. Why are we doing this? Because everything in the world has changed all of a sudden. We were told that everything is going to change, but it's as if we didn't believe that things were going to change until we were hit with COVID-19. And all of a sudden, all we knew in the past became questionable, and we need a new translation of what everything means. And this is why we have this amazing panel today to tell us more about how we can introduce and implement collaboration at the international level that really works. And we will know now maybe the importance of this kind of discussion when we know the expertise of the people in the room in this area. So Professor Safi, I'll turn it over to you to pose the first question to Paige.
Yes. Dear unique FAMR guests, nice to meet you. And we'll start now our first question about your experience. We need to know from each of you your personal experience about the international collaboration first. Let's start with Paige. Would you please start?
Thank you, Safnaz. Before I start with that question, let's start with why is it important to do collaboration and international collaboration? Because we know that it does take extra effort. It's very important, I feel, particularly for health professions education, in order to move from single case studies to multiple case studies, and potentially to looking at changes in practice that you may want to compare from one place to another. We have really, medical education has lagged behind clinical studies in doing these multiple case studies and clinical trials. And I feel like we could get much further ahead in education if we could do these types of studies. And so we did have the opportunity early in FAMR years of the FAMR Institute to do several international studies. The first was initiated by Jose Cuito from the Philippines. He was in our first or second class, and wanted to look at the accreditation systems in developing countries as compared to the US. And Nancy Gary, who was president of ECFMG at that time, was very interested in this study. And so she and I helped with that. And we ended up doing a document review with about 9 fellows from the first and second classes of the accreditation practices in different countries, and showed that they were quite rigorous, which was, of course, not the view at the time. This was in the early 2000s. A second study that we did was of the medical practice plans of senior medical students in Africa, and from the African perspective. This had been looked at a great deal from other perspectives, but not from the African perspective. And we had a number of African fellows at that time that wanted to do this study. And this ended up in 2 papers. One was a feasibility paper showing that what we had planned to do back in Philadelphia, when we all got together and had these plans for following a class of senior students for several years, and doing where we thought we could have electronic records, that was just not going to work, because most of these countries did not yet have electronic records of their student body, for instance. And so we ended up changing the study and did a single paper survey, and that was eventually published. And again, showing the perspective from the senior medical students, African medical students' perspective of what they wanted to do for practice. So these were studies that we did internationally with FAMR. I've done a number of other collaborative studies with individual fellows at FAMR studying the curriculum. With SAMR, we did a paper on our learning circle part of our curriculum. With Valdez in Brazil, we did one on our team-based approach, but more than that, it was our poster session. And so we've done several studies like that. The latest was with Heenal Shah and Zara Ladani in Pakistan, Heenal in India, on our leadership curriculum. We've done 2 papers on that curriculum and our teaching learning methods. So I think these are all useful, both the multiple case studies, which is like that first document review, and the student perspective this was from about 5 different countries in Africa. and then the curriculum studies from different perspectives. So that's been part of my experience in international collaboration.
Thank you, Paige. Now it's your turn, Bill. Would you start with your experience in collaboration?
Professor Safi, may I just before we move to Bill, I just ask Paige, maybe she can tap a little bit more on your experience in building communities of practice, Paige, and how this transcribes later on into collaborative practices between fellows. So it's something I think that will be useful for us to understand your background in that area.
I think the community of practice is really an important backbone of doing successful collaboration, is building a respectful, mutually beneficial community of practice where you respect people, you work together to get things done, and then that gives the foundation for doing collaborative studies, because collaborative studies are not easy. They take years. So it takes really trust that you know people will come through with what they're going to do, with the hitches that occur when a manuscript is not accepted, a workshop is not accepted. So I think building that relationship, that trust-based relationship in the community of practice is, thank you for mentioning it, Samar. I think it is essential for the underpinning, the roots that will keep a collaboration going through its trials and errors.
Thank you, Paige. Over to you, Professor Safi.
Okay, it's your turn, Bill. Would you tell us about your experience in international collaboration, please?
Sure. First, I'm going to say hi to Prof. Ashraf and Prof. Safinas, people I've seen in the past. It just reminds me of kind of what we've lost with this pandemic thing. So several years ago, Prof. Ashraf and some others came over to Philadelphia, and that face-to-face meeting was really important, and it really stuck in a way that sometimes our digital interactions don't. So let me talk a little bit about this idea that Prof. Safi has mentioned about collaborations, and let me use an example. And Samar Ahmed, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to use you as an example, because Samar and I met roughly 15 years ago. I think you were introduced to me through John Orsini, who may have been at a meeting in the Middle East and mentioned that you should get in touch with me. And over a period of a couple of years, we interacted, and there was a sense that we had a common mission of trying to improve faculty development. So we shared that common mission. There was also a sense that sort of neither organization was trying to rise to the top. We both wanted the success of not just the two organizations, but everyone should succeed. And then over a period of interactions, we realized that we could trust one another, that if Samar said she was going to do X, she did X. There was a certain predictability. I knew that she would be on the call 10 minutes early always. Then there was also a sense in one of our early calls of who she was as a person, because dancing around in the background was one of her daughters, who at that time I think was maybe, 10 or 8 or something like that. And that added a facet to my understanding of who Samar was. So those are sort of the building blocks of our relationship, and it has a lot to do with the more generic concepts of collaboration, which are nicely articulated by a paper that was put out by the NetWeaver Forum by a woman, Waze Slackern at Stanford. And she articulated 4 principles of collaboration that I think are just so solid and so, in a sense, they're just, as my kids would say, duh, but it's really worth articulating. And the first one was that the strategy is determined by the mission, not the organizational ambitions. So a common mission is absolutely critical. So focusing on growth and focusing on the growth of the mission is the key. The second is that partnerships are built on trust. And they're not built on control or accountability or mechanisms for checking off deliverables. They're built on trust. And just I'll say a little bit more about trust in a minute because it's a slightly fuzzy concept sometimes. Third, the other is that promoting your partners and not yourself, so that you're not egocentric in the relationship, but you're in a shared sense of responsibility. And this is actually a point that's emphasized in a really great book that I always recommend to people by Adam Grant called Give and Take. And in that book, he actually references a very interesting reference by a guy named Ross in '79, who talked about, and I love this term, responsibility bias or egocentric bias. So you ask a married couple, you ask a basketball team, you ask people who does what in the relationship, and based on your own ego, you always think, or one always thinks, that you do more in the relationship. That's called responsibility bias. But it's the idea of promoting others rather than yourself. And then finally, the sense that that it's not about making a star. It's not about making Ain Shams the best or the brightest star in the universe, but it's about building a constellation of stars so that everyone shines. Because the strength, as Paige really pointed out very nicely, the strength is in the multiplicity of skills. So I mentioned the book Give and Take by Adam Grant. He talks about a number of things that are benefits of collaboration and benefits of being a giver rather than a taker. Now, one of them is the ripple effect. So if you give, others will give. The other is reputation. So that there's a certain sense that if someone is a taker rather than a giver, this is what people sometimes call the taker's tax. They know that, oh, that person, they're in it for themselves, so I'm going to charge a little extra in some sense. And then there's the responsibility bias. So let me just say a couple of high-level things about trust, because it's always a concept that seems a little bit elusive. We talk about it a lot. There are a million different paradigms for trust, but the one that I like has 4 components. One is integrity. Integrity. So that's doing what you say you're going to do. That's easy. Well, actually, it's not so easy, because if you are in a meeting and you agree to something, you better be careful about what you agree to, because you're going to be held to that. And I always watch my colleague Paige Morahan when I agree to something, because she always writes it down. So you got to be careful what you agree to in any sort of a group, but that's key, integrity. Second is predictability, the ability to sort of anticipate what others will do. That grows from over time. So predictability. Here's an interesting one, delayed reciprocity. So that's being a giver without the expectation that you're going to get something back right away or even at any particular time or in any particular way. It's being a giver and not a taker. Giving with the sense that you may get some returns in the future, maybe on specified time and place. And then finally, there's another one that's interesting, which is called exposed vulnerability. And that one says you're enabling others to take advantage of you or your vulnerabilities, but expecting that they will not. So it's revealing things that may represent weaknesses or stress points to your trusted partner, believing that they will not take advantage of that. And I won't go into explicit examples, but I think Samar and I have shared a number of things where we've shared things knowing that the other would not take advantage of that knowledge. So that's my sense of trust. It's integrity, it's predictability, it's exposed vulnerability, and it's delayed reciprocity. A lot of these concepts are amplified by leadership, and I'm not going to go into a whole spiel on leadership, but there are a couple of fundamentals there that are essential, and one is communication. And as our friend Heenal Shah, that Paige referenced, always likes to say, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And that's because listening is critical and more important than speaking. The other piece of leadership, I think, is preparation. So that's understanding who you're working with, understanding the culture. I like to say knowing more than you think you need to know. Further to this point of leadership is resilience, and there's a whole set of components that contribute to resilience, but one of them is your social network. And a social network that is a low density network, that means that you have people in your network that are not in your immediate circle. Those are great for a shoulder to cry on, but the people that are not in your immediate circle are the ones who are going to give you a different perspective and give you fresh ideas. And in a certain sense say, hey, Bill, snap out of it. Life is not so bad. And then reflection, to understand that all relationships have ups and downs, and when things are not going well, to take a step back and reflect on what's going on. So finally, we've learned a lot over the years from the relationships that Paige and I have built through FAMER, but also more recently through the relationships that I've worked on in the last several years through the Network Towards Unity for Health, where we're building a whole set of relationships. And the lessons that I take away from those years of collaboration is, one, that generosity works. It has a multiplier effect. People not only appreciate it, but they feed forward, they give forward. The other is something Paige mentioned, and that is that, and Samar, you mentioned, community is the secret sauce. Because when the leader or the facilitators are not there, it is the other people in the community that are going to provide resilience, ideas, and support. The other thing we've learned is that learning is bi-directional. I learn as much from Samar as Samar learns from me. This is a bi-directional piece, and the minute you think that you are the expert and that your opinion is actually really, really, really important, perhaps even more important than anyone else's, you're in trouble. And so recognize that learning is bi-directional. The other thought that we thought about over the years, and we wondered about whether leadership could be taught across cultures. It can, with modifications. I'm not going to go further into that. And then finally, I will say that partnership is personal. Partnership is personal. It's about knowing the person that you're talking to, knowing that they have 2 kids, knowing that they like to go skiing, knowing those other facets of their lives that makes them a whole person. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. I want to share with you like a summary of what you and Paige have mentioned. For me, Paige mentioned the modalities in terms of clinical trials and the multinational case studies published. And you, Bill, you stressed on the values governing the international collaboration in terms of shared vision and its growth, shared responsibility between partners, building a constellation of stars. That's the mutual benefit of each. Do you agree with me for that?
Yeah, those are the important things. And without those values, the rest is built on a foundation of dust.
Yes, thank you so much for the values you've mentioned. And now it's your turn, Samar. Where are you, Samar?
Yes, I just want to, I'm here. I just want to comment on the beautiful flashback that Bill, I don't know, intentionally or unintentionally created. I just want to tell you who Samar is that Bill is talking about. I'm Samar Ahmed, just for those who don't know on the call. And I'm managing the regional FAMER Institute in the Middle East and North Africa region, which is the product of the collaboration that Bill was talking about, that later on expanded into collaborations in a multitude of areas that we are hoping we can expand upon. And I just want to just give also a flashback to you, Bill. I will never forget our first call on the phone when you asked me, who are your kids? What are they doing? Who's your oldest? What's he called? What's his name? And I was like, why is this guy asking me all this personal stuff? And later on, when I became in this position where Bill was years ago, I understood why, because this is how you build a partnership. partnership is personal. So it has to go personal. And thank you so much, Bill, for highlighting that, and for all the rest of the beautiful things that you and Paige brought to life in the past few minutes. And now it's the turn for my beautiful Janet. And because Janet is so beautiful in my eyes, because everything she says is wisdom. And Janet, if you can spend just a few minutes talking about the value of international collaboration to you and where you are from that, it would be great. And I know you're taking us into a totally different perspective that we are so anxious to hear. So take it away, Janet.
Do you want me to talk about my experience, or do you want me to go on to how international collaboration might work on educational quality? Are you asking?
At the moment, we just want to know who you are in collaboration, Janet, and then.
Okay. So, well, actually, I did take a completely different view, because when I was asked a question, I decided to answer it concretely and to think what that told me. And everything that I'm going to say replies to pre-COVID, COVID, post-COVID, makes no difference. So for about 45 years, over the past 45 years, I've worked as assistant director of a WHO collaborating center, implementing projects in countries around the globe, South Korea, Kenya, Brazil. I've worked in the WHO European office, in Scandinavia, Southern Europe, Russia, the former Soviet Union. And often I found myself picking up the pieces when various advisors from the West have made contextually insensitive recommendations. Now, what do we mean by the West? We needn't be euphemistic when discussing international influence and power, which is really what this is, for me, a central concept. As I always tell our students, we must define our terms. So we need to know, when we're in this collaboration, who is doing what, who is making recommendations, where are they from, what is their context, how is this all happening? It's an important question that gets at the assumptions that we make. I've worked in lots of different countries on curriculum development, Sudan, Indonesia, Ethiopia, developing distance learning in India, Bangladesh, for example, providing training and advice on various things in Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, as well as developing very close links with colleagues based on ongoing conversations, for example, here in Cairo with my dear friend Samar. So importantly, I can say I've worked all over the place, but importantly, I also work inside my own country as a regulator, a policy researcher, an academic, and educational consultant. It sometimes happens that people who are known abroad are not so well known at home. I've met British representatives in Europe and I've never heard of them. When that's the case, their skill set might be limited. I feel that unless you work inside your own culture and your own context and reflect on that, you've no chance of working helpfully anywhere else. Important for me has been seeing how politics and social values in my country affect medical education. We need to understand ourselves before we can understand anyone else. And certainly if anyone is looking to the West for our practice is very often affected by our politics and our social values. I've worked, as you know, closely with the World Federation for Medical Education, leading the updating of their global standards, changing them from a prescriptive style to a principles-based model. We did this because we recognized two things. Firstly, there is almost no robust evidence base for education. That's simply because education is a social science. And acquiring a robust database in social sciences is really difficult, since views and practices are socially constructed. They come from where you are. And secondly, because we recognize the huge variation in contexts and know that people need to decide on their own standards rather than adopting some that are specified from outside their own culture and circumstances. So we take comments on our standards from all over the world. for this past 10 years, as you know, I've worked as academic director of the FAMA Kiel Masters in Health Professions Education that focuses on accreditation and assessment. And we've had the privilege of teaching students from more than 40 countries. We teach them to be critical, to focus first of all on their own context and its needs and resources, rather than just trying to learn what people from a foreign land say. Though, of course, our course authors come from all around the world. And our students also must know what's currently being said and what the theories are that underpin education in general in order to have an academic rigorous course. So we ensure that our students can differentiate between rhetoric and reality. And I'm happiest to say that I've written the Oxford Textbook of Medical Education chapter on developing a contextual curriculum with colleagues from Sudan and India. And our forthcoming book on developing a theory of medical education will have Samar as one of its editors. And that's a very, very exciting project indeed. And what have I learned in these 45 years of working on policy and practice in medical education across the world? I've learned that people find it difficult to have the confidence that their own experience is their best teacher. Very often, old feelings associated with colonialism are still powerful, whether as the colonizer or the colonized. And I might say something, if we've got time later, about decolonizing curricula. The dominance of the English language across the world that enables Western ideas to be disseminated is a consequence of that colonization. I've learned that what Bleakley and Bryce and Bly in the United Kingdom called medical education imperialism is still a force, and that a voice from the West is listened to more than voices from elsewhere. Look at the first three speakers. I've learned that people are willing to accept uncritically ideas of globalization when it might be better to analyze and reject such a political concept that's full of contradictions. But like the other panelists have said, I've also learned that when we honestly and equally do respect each other, and that's not easy, we try to find out about each other and value each other's experience in their context and realize that only the people who are living in their own context can truly understand what's possible and what's needed. Then that is when the right thing happens. The right thing doesn't happen when somebody believes they have a new method, a new approach, a new idea. It's when people decide for themselves what they need. And that's true regardless of pandemics.
Yeah, absolutely, Janet. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I cannot highlight and stress enough on this fact that really, I came to learn this through FAMER. I came to learn this, the concept of accepting international capacities and understanding that those people sitting next to you of different colors, of different religions, of different origins, these are people of expertise that you can tap on and utilize. I can see my good friend Siraj as well in the panel, and we will maybe listen to him more in the third. Hello, Siraj, in the third part of this day, and he will have a lot to say about that as well. So having said that, I think Paige, who is my personal mentor, a person whom I've learned from a lot in the beginning of my career, I think Professor Safi, you have a question for Paige. Is that correct?
Yes, it's correct. Paige, would you tell us about some elements for a successful international collaboration from your background or your experience in ILAM and in FAMER?
I think this goes into, I think, our second question, which is a very important one. You know, what leads to successful collaboration?
Yes.
And so this now, again, we're pinning it on the community of practice, the mutual respect, the trust that all the elements that Bill mentioned and that Janet's also mentioned, is understanding the cultural context where people are coming from. So that's kind of the roots. So that's definitely need that for success. I'm a very practical person, and I want to bring up two things that I feel are important in collaborations that we often don't stress enough particularly in the joy of the ideas, brainstorming and ideas, but getting the job done. One is, which I mentioned in the study about African senior medical students, that is spending the time to find out what's feasible. Like we found out, we had a meeting in Philadelphia, then we did a survey among the people who were interested in the study, and then we had a small meeting in Uganda. And all of this was necessary to bring out facts like, as I mentioned before, none of the countries in Africa, except for South Africa, had electronic student records. Second, the number of students each year varied tremendously, depending on the government, so that just getting an idea of how many students there were was a challenge. So we faced those realities in that meeting in Uganda and then redesigned the study. And I think this is important, to take the time necessary to understand the full context and then redesign as you need to. And then the second practical aspect I'll mention, just attending to the logistics. How do you get 12 time zones together to meet efficiently? Who helps plan that? What central mechanism are you going to use for collecting data? Who's going to analyze? Just all of those logistical elements are very important. And frankly, that's one of the roles I played. Like Janet said, she often felt like she played picking up the pieces when people didn't understand the cultural context. I felt like I picked up the pieces in the logistical side to make sure that things got done. Summarizing meetings. I felt like it was a major step forward when Skype came along and we could share the screen and then all know what we were working on. And then when Dropbox came along, so we could have a central place to share documents. So that's what I think. Those are two kind of logistical things I would mention. The other is just being transparent about what you're doing. So
I could just add, if I could just amplify a little bit on what Paige said, because there's another concept, and that is the issue of leadership, because all of the things that Paige is talking about are, the example is set by the individuals who are in positions of leadership, whether that's leadership with authority or without authority, but the example is set by people in leadership. And the other piece that leadership plays is that leadership creates the environment. Leadership creates the environment for equal participation. So the concepts that I emphasized earlier, that Janet amplified, that Paige has mentioned, that equal sharing doesn't necessarily happen in a vacuum. And it sometimes takes the space created by leadership to make that sort of sharing possible. Thanks.
You're muted, Dr. Safi. Dr. Safi, yes.
Okay. Okay. So thank you, Paige. Thank you. Now, Bill, it's your turn to tell us the challenges of a successful international collaboration. What are the challenges you do expect?
Okay.
Yes, Bill?
Yeah. Well, we've sort of talked a lot around those issues, and I think Janet actually emphasized some of the real challenges of there's the feasibility that Paige talked about,
yes,
but also the notion of history and the notion of colonization is the term that's used these days, but it's the sense that these ideas from another culture were laid down to a culture that was initially completely different, but that those imported cultural norms have become so embedded that they're difficult to shake loose. And often shaking loose implies to some people getting rid of everything, which is clearly not the right way to go, but getting the right balance for self-determination is, I think, a huge issue in terms of getting local context involved. And one of the ways that this plays out is the use of jargon terms. Now, Janet mentioned forcing the students to define their terms. It drives me crazy when people add the word based to everything and think that everyone will sagely, wisely nod their heads when you say competency-based. Oh, yes. We're evidence-based. Oh, yes. Community-based, problem-based. And until you get to the point that Janet has emphasized about defining terms, those sorts of words are I think they're destructive. And they represent part of the story of colonization because they sort of come in from the West, and because they came from the West, they're put on an altar, and people worship at the altar of those phrases. So my word to partners and to learners is often, oh, you're doing something you're calling competency-based curriculum. Tell me what you're doing without ever using the word competency-based. Go. And they struggle because it's like, oh, well, it's competency-based. No, actually, I don't know. So those sorts of, educational imperialism is the other word that Janet mentioned. Those sorts of words are a relatively significant challenge, to answer your question, Prof. Safinas, to effective and co-equal partnership, because they are worshipped at the altar of Western respectability.
Thank you, Bill. I need to add something. I myself suffered while being in UK, the abbreviations created locally. They are dealing with words with abbreviations not known to the visitors. So it was really about 2 months to be in line with them, trying to understand the many abbreviations they were telling about.
It's like
I myself
handshake.
suffered that.
It's like a secret handshake, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes. Thank you. It's your turn. Let's move to Summer.
Yes, I think we only have 12 minutes left in this session, which means that we didn't feel time flying by, which means that we got lots of beautiful insight from our panelists. And of course, it is my pleasure to give this time to Janet. Janet, if you can focus a little bit more, in addition to what has already been said, on what we can do to make international partnership work. Is there something we can do to make it work? In addition to, we all agree that there are obstacles, there's hindrances, starting from the university or the value of the organization that Bill kindly mentioned at the beginning as a driver for collaborative practices. What can we do to make this work? What can we do to make this have an impact, Janet?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really difficult question. I mean, one of the things that, because you can only do this for yourself, other people can't help you to do that, no matter how nice they are. Everything that I've said or would have said relates to the current fundamental review of what's taught in British universities. And this review goes under the name of Decolonizing the Curriculum. All universities here are recognizing the Western, white, usually male assumptions that our curriculum make, and are challenging and changing that. At UCL, where I work, and in SENMEDIC, my own organization, we have people working on decolonizing the curricula that we're involved in, on refocusing our assumptions by expertise and value. But we can only do that for ourselves. We can't do it for anybody else. And that's a problem. It's like the contradiction of saying to somebody, be a self-directed learner. You cannot tell somebody to be a self-directed learner. You cannot tell them to do that according to your outcomes. So there are lots of contradictions. And it bothers me that when we're talking about international collaboration, what comes to mind? Is it the US and the UK collaborating? Is it the UK and Canada, France and Norway, Sudan and Egypt? No, it's normally the global north or the west and somewhere else, the global south, the Middle East, Asia. So immediately the idea of collaboration is problematical unless we think about that for ourselves. And there are assumptions that we need to overcome. I'm not against international collaboration, obviously, but I feel that we need to not be assuming that one partner knows less or will learn from the other partner who knows more. And in education, that's really important, because in education, and you'll know, medical education runs according to socially constructed fashion. And that means that socially, I don't even bother to keep up with all these different base things that Bill was talking about, because I know next year there'll be a new base. So I don't even know most.
Janet, and the ladders as well, not just the
Oh,
base.
don't. Anything that's a ladder, a base, an acronym, a diagram, a pyramid, a three-dimensional, no, question it all. But then I've told people to question it all, and that's no good. What you want is people who will question things for themselves. And because education is socially constructed, it means that if you look at cross-cultural psychology, you know, even things like giving feedback is completely different in one culture and another. Hierarchy is different, respect is different, everything is different, resources are different, and so on. So I think that it's a real problem to try to define what will make collaboration work, because we can only do something about ourselves. We can't do something about other people. I think there are lots of other things to attack. You know, for example, when I run around the world, people ask me, you know, what's done in your country? Well, does it really matter? Is it appropriate? And they'll read what's published in journals and believe that the whole of my country, or possibly America too, is doing some kind of newfangled fashionable curriculum. Well, it's not, because things develop organically. So actually knowing anyone else's context is a real problem. And that means that until we actually learn to depend on our understanding of our own context, to not feel this colonization, however that goes, we really will find collaboration problematical. We can't have a collaboration where some people have ideas and other people don't, or feel that some things are the right things to do and other people aren't, because in education there's absolutely no evidence about that. You know, what I think would characterize really good collaboration, I mean, I could say lots and lots more about this, but I won't, because we haven't got time. What to me would characterize really good collaboration would be this: I would welcome consultants from your country and your region to come to mine, to come to Western Europe, to come to North America, to work, not that I can speak from North America, to work with us to improve our medical education. Not to tell us anything about what you believe we do, but to come and look at us. And I realize that for all the reasons I've said, that's a difficult task. And it places a burden on us in the global north, I know, to invite you to listen to your contributions. International collaboration cannot continue to be a one-way street. For it to be a true collaboration rather than neo-colonialism. So I'm hoping for more international collaboration to be within regions of the world rather than between them. Developing medical education cannot be about continuing, and I think Bill said something like this, to implement imported ideas. And I'm sure that if people start to look at their own context and use their own knowledge of that, And first of all, to start with identifying a problem. And not doing PBL is not a problem. That's something completely different. So start with the problem that you actually have. Think about it from your point of view, your social capital, your resources, your culture. And then if you need any help with that, fine. But very often you'll find you actually don't. And then I'm sure that the concrete impact on educational quality will be really, really positive.
Thank you, Janet. And just in Paige, I'll just comment and then give you the mic to tell us a final word of wisdom. I just want to reflect on what Janet said right now and how this reflects to my former experience. And this is exactly what Bill told me when I was building my project. He says, why are you trying to copy something that exists somewhere else? Define the problem. What is the problem? And we spent sessions identifying the problem. And I just realized that I just wanted to do something just for the sake of doing it. And I didn't once stop to ask myself, why am I doing this change? So thank you so much for this, Janet. And I'll turn it over to Paige. A final word of wisdom, 1 minute, Paige, 1 minute, Bill, and 1 minute, Janet, before we close this session. Go ahead, Paige.
I think building on what Janet has said, for successful collaboration, I think we can look at health disparities research and work that's been done in community engaged research, and because they have really developed procedures for respectful co-creation of studies and listening to people. And quick anecdote, this is in Boston years ago. One of the major hospitals wanted to do something with the community around them. And, it's a hospital that does a lot of diabetic work, and they thought they definitely could do things like that in the community and help. And they were dumbfounded when they met with the community. The community said, we want to work on rat control. And, that really took them back. And good for them, they listened and they worked on that problem.
Thank you, Paige. Bill, final word of wisdom.
Yeah, I'm just going to say two things, and it's really in response to what Janet was saying. First is that we can't change others, but we can create an environment in which we almost literally keep our mouths shut and encourage the other to speak. It's not that hard to do, but if you literally press your lips together after you ask a question, you will resist the urge to speak. And then the other comment is the leader, the facilitator, the educator can create environments in which learners, partners are encouraged to ask questions. Creating that space, that environment is a skill, a learnable skill, and one that will encourage that sort of questioning. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Final word of wisdom, Janet.
My word of wisdom is take a sabbatical from international collaboration. Start working in your own context, because all education's a social science. Everything in social science is contextual. In social science, there are no universal truths. So start talking with your colleagues who understand your context, take a sabbatical from international work, and you'll find you know more than you think you do.
Thank you, Janet. Professor Safinez, with Janet's word of wisdom and the word of wisdom from Paige and Bill, I think we want to close this session to get ready for our coming guests and the coming session, which will be all about assessment. So I want to thank so much our panelists for the first session. Thank you so much, Professor Paige. Thank you so much, Professor Janet. Thank you so much, Professor Bill. Dr. Safi, would you like to close the session?
Thank you so much, Paige, Bill, and Janet. Thank you very much, Summer, for running such amazing discussion and the reflection about your experience also in MENA-FRI in Cairo. Thank you so much for the attending participants from every specialty of faculties of Ain Shams University. Thank you so much, and from also other universities. We need to close this session. We need to move to the second one. Thank you so much for the guest speakers, and let's move to the second one. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And guess what we are going to do now? Now we're going to focus on assessment. And why are we going to do this? Because it has become a dilemma. It always was a dilemma, and we always were taught that assessment drives learning. It has always driven learning. It drove learning in the past, it's driving learning now, but now there is an added problem of the COVID-19 and the issues that we are facing. And I think if anything has suffered post-COVID, assessment has taken the biggest share of the suffering. But in addition to that, it has also attained the biggest share in innovation and in innovative practices. So this is why we will spend the coming hour with two of the most amazing experts in assessment, Jack Boulay and John Norsini. And I will introduce Jack first because he will be speaking first. And I think most of you know Jack Boulay. Jack Boulay is not a small name in assessment. Dr. Boulay, he recently retired from the position of Vice President, Research and Data Resources from both ECFMG and FAMR. He has he graduated as a mathematician, but then he has a master's degree and a PhD in assessment. Dr. Boulay is a professor and an honorary professor in multiple places, and he is one of the most highly published people in the area of assessment. And I think most of you have either cited his work or worked with his work or referenced his work at one point of time. So we have a living expert among us now, Professor Jack Boulay, that we will be really happy to hear from. I just want to add just one small thing, but just in order to be able to sorry, just a second. One small thing, because I just wanted to congratulate Professor Jack Boulay for being awarded, he is the recipient of the 2021 John Hubbard Award in recognition for his extensive contribution to the field of assessment. It is an award that he just received, I think, yesterday. So we want to join forces in congratulating him for getting this award. Professor Jack, you can take the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. That's a very nice, kind introduction. Is my sound okay?
It's perfect.
And can you see my screen?
Not at the moment.
Okay. That's not good.
No, we saw it, but then it disappeared. So can you please reshare it? Yes, here it is. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, you can still see it?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit about the future of assessment post-COVID-19. And I'll highlight some of the technological advances. I'm going to try to make a case that these changes were already happening and that the pandemic actually just accelerated that change. So I'll talk about a few things related to developing items, to scoring different types of items, and how assessment not only has changed because of COVID to some extent, but what it's going to look like in the future. I don't have any conflicts of interest. Some of the information that I'm going to present on automatic item generation came from the Medical Council of Canada. So I'd just like to acknowledge them. I serve on their Assessment Innovation Task Force and was formerly the chair of their research advisory group. So the outline of this talk is I'm going to say something about what did COVID-19 actually change. a little bit about technology and education and assessment and some of the evolving competencies. As many of you know, as healthcare practitioners, what you do or what you did 10 years ago is quite different from what you do today. And some of the technological things I think are important that we're going to have to measure in our future nurses, physicians, and other healthcare professionals. I'll talk a little bit about test administration. I won't go into much depth there, but some of the issues concerning how we deliver tests now, given that we can often not times get people together in a test center and or some clinical simulation center or something else. So that's changed as well. My area that I think is really important is how do we score things? Can we make it more efficient? Many medical schools and nursing schools use up a lot of faculty time to actually assess students, and maybe there's a better way of doing that. A little bit on assessing practicing physicians as well, and I'll end it with looking to the future of assessment. So COVID-19, certainly we can all agree that some of the in-person assessments are difficult or impossible to administer, although many groups have found with personal protective equipment to be able to do in-person exams, but the problem there is maybe we're measuring different things. Telemedicine communication may be quite different from actual communication with the patient in the room. I think there's some new constructs to be measured, certainly as much of healthcare is brought online. How do we assess people in dealing with patients or other caregivers or other colleagues when it's all being done over the internet? There's some new types of assessments, although they're not really that new. If you go back in the literature, there have been virtual OSCEs around for 20 years. But COVID, as I mentioned before, has probably accelerated some of the change. I'll talk a little bit about automatic item generation, which I think is important as we try to build better banks of items. A little bit about technology enhanced scoring and some of the big data types of things that certainly you as practitioners will have to be able to handle as you move forward in your careers. So education assessment, certainly they're directly related. Learning models and technology are not completely mirrored by similar changes in educational assessment. What I've found through the last 10, 20 years is that oftentimes the assessments lag behind the profession. That is, we're measuring things that might have been important 5 or 10 years ago, but maybe aren't as important as some of the things that are needed to be assessed in current practicing healthcare givers. It's mostly been physician or healthcare worker individually centered. That is, we don't really look at teams or interdependence that often. And I think the educational assessment must evolve alongside the learning models and technologies. And I think, if there's any positive with the pandemic, it's kind of forced the issue. Let's try to figure out what we can assess that's really important now as opposed to what was important 5 or 10 years ago. I think there's some new competencies that will need to be assessed, inquiry and improvement, interdependency, kind of working in teams. I think that your nursing, physiotherapy, medical students will need to be able to be better at information management as the number of kind of articles in medicine doubles every 2 or 3 years. You have to have interest and insight, some of these aptitudes that are quite difficult to measure, and then involvement in patient care, involvement in that person's story as they come to see you. And I think all in all, that many of these competencies aren't well assessed, even though they're quite important to the current workforce. Test administration scoring, we still have selected and constructed response items to be administered on the computer. That's been happening long before COVID, but it's been accelerated as we're not able to get people together in a test center or even somewhere else to take an exam. I think the enhanced scoring routines, I'll talk a little bit about that more in a while, but we can come up with better ways or reliably efficient, economical ways to not only score assessments, but provide automated feedback to the learner. A little bit on automatic item generation. Most of this came when I was with the Medical Council of Canada on the Research Advisory Group. It essentially is a way that if we can get the right conceptual framework for a particular disease process or symptomology, then we can use the computer to develop more items. And as many as you know that are developing items can be very costly and very difficult, especially if we have to rely on faculty or people that we don't pay. This is a group at the Medical Council of Canada that we're developing what we call these item maps. And you'll see that on the right side, that is kind of a conceptual process that you could follow to tell the computer how to actually develop particular items. And here it is there that we can see that we have different kinds of conditions, different timing of events, types of surgery, physical examination, et cetera. And if we can put that in a map format, we can pick and choose different ways to present that item that will have different correct answers and different distractors. So the basic process for automatic item generation is a cognitive map. You identify the problem, for example, post-operative fever, the sources of information, what kind of information that you would give in the stem of the item to diagnose the problem, and then some of the key features within each information source, so such as fever, needed to create different instances of the problem. And here it is. Here you can see in the middle, a 50-year-old woman has a blank on post-operative day, timing of the fever. The patient has a temperature of 38.5 and so forth. And by feeding this into the computer, it can pick different types or different levels or types of fever, timing of it, and what physical examination findings, coming up with a different item. The automatic item generator, this was Mark Garrell at the University of Alberta, did much of this work. The item model becomes specified, the information is systematically combined to produce new items. Now, not all those items will be great, and oftentimes there still needs to be some actually expert review to say, you know, that item doesn't really belong or it does. Some of the lessons learned back about 10 years ago were maybe even a little bit shorter than that, but oftentimes the item generator would generate distractors that weren't really relevant. And a lot of programming had to be put in place to make sure that that didn't happen, and or have review by some of the particular experts on a test writing panel or an item writing panel. That makes it a little bit more difficult because the efficiency of developing items, if it has to depend on expert review, there's not that big an efficiency gain because you still need those people to look at the items. The coding was complex, and the Medical Council of Canada a number of years back developed what's called the item butler, and you'll see a picture of it in a minute. It allows the test committee members to create their own cognitive models, revise them on site, and generate and revise samples of items for review. So as long as they get that cognitive map correctly, they can go back, generate items, and go and review them. This is what it looks like. I won't go into too much detail, but it allows the individual to look at different events, chest trauma diagnosis, for example, and figure out within that the different permutations and combinations to come up with different items. I think the next steps of automatic item generation is to look at how you can provide feedback. So if you can automatically generate the items, maybe you can automatically generate the feedback. The items are placed in an exam as part of a blueprint, and therefore maybe we can tell people what they're good at, what they're poor at, and where their particular faults are when going across a whole item bank. Other types of items, you know, one could think of generating perhaps checklists for an OSCE or these clinical decision-making cases where we could develop or automatically generate the key features. The other thing is modeling the psychometric properties of AIG-based items. Historically, in assessment, people haven't been very good at actually looking at items and saying how difficult it was or how well it would discriminate. But if we had all that information in a bank for a large number of items, perhaps that would be, we could get a better estimate of what the difficulty or the discrimination of the item was even before putting it on an assessment. The area that I'm most interested in is technology-enhanced scoring. Here, can we use computers to score some of all of our assessments? Certainly, we could all agree that experts can be biased and may consider other irrelevant variables when formulating their judgments about students or some other practitioner. And the scores may not adequately represent performance, and there's certainly a cost and logistical issue of getting human raters in to come and evaluate the students, residents, or somebody else. There's a number of technology-enhanced scoring, explicit outcome measures. Here, I think a lot of the work's been done with electromechanical mannequins. If the physiology is correct, and we have a machine-readable record of what was done, for example, a drug was given, an airway was maintained, etc., maybe we can judge the adequacy of the performer by what particular things they did and how well the patient, in this case a simulated patient, improved or did not improve. There's use of natural language processing, oftentimes years ago, that was done with essays and other types of short answer formats. Analysis of talk time, certainly when we have OSCEs or some sort of interaction between a provider and a patient, can we code the talk time and come up with some indication of the adequacy of the communication? And then automated computer vision analysis, this is something that's coming in the pipeline now. It's been used as part of the Olympics for figure skating, gymnastics, etc. But we can use that vision analysis to say, well, maybe if we can read people's faces, their proximal distance, we can also come up with metrics for evaluating them. The automated scoring, there are a number of ways you can do this, logistic regression, dysentery, some Bayes theorem, but it's a way of saying if we can get enough information, whether that's information about what they did, the order and sequencing of what they did in terms of working up a patient, maybe we can use the computer to actually figure out how well that performance represented that of perhaps an expert going through a similar problem or case. Natural language processing, I think this is important. The National Board of Medical Examiners, when the former Step 2 CS was running, developed some algorithms to come up with a score on the clinical note. So after a student had interacted with a patient, they wrote a clinical note in the form of a subjective objective assessment plan. If you had enough of those, you could look at the ones that certainly even based on human raters were exceptional and how they differed from the ones that were not so great, and use that information put into the computer to figure out any new note coming up, whether it was good, great, or somewhere in the middle. The value of automated scoring, I think, is it allows you, if done correctly, to get rid of the human raters, a big cost saving there, and as well as perhaps provide less biased ratings. That is, the computer, yes, it could still be biased depending on how you program it, but it would have some idea of looking at these performances and coming up based on its data bank of other performances in the past, what is the correct score for that particular task. I think even if you used computers for quality assurance, many of the national exams, whether it's the OSCEs or something else, it would save cost in terms of allowing people to figure out what was going on in terms of scores without having to bring the human raters in. Some of the work that Brian Clauser at the National Board did, policy capturing, if we knew the correct or various correct sequences of working up either with the standardized patient, a mannequin, or even a clinical case on the computer, we can look at a person's performance in relation to that and essentially figure out how much did that person deviate from what would be considered an expert performance path and use that as the score for a particular task. This would also be true for clinical decision-making items and other kind of simulation or computer-based simulations, that if we knew how the experts would do it, or a number of ways the experts would do it, we could essentially measure how much that student or other examinee deviated from that expert path. I think automated speech recognition is important, more so because the fact that oftentimes if we could get that speech sample, we could figure out, number of turns in conversation, who's talking more, who's talking less, and in different contexts come up with a score. So for example, in a critical care scenario, you probably want a lot of talking between the individuals, because that would say they're trying to clarify or rectify things, and maybe that was an indicator of less than ideal performance. In a typical OSCE, certainly it seems possible that we can take what was said, go from speech to text and actually kind of code a checklist based on this automatically. The automated computer vision analysis, I think there's work being done there. We can look at facial expressions, etc., and say, well, maybe that's an indicator of empathy. And I know some of the people out at Stanford in the United States are doing some work on this to look at, how well can we read empathy communication just from the proximal distance between people and some of their facial expressions. I think assessments for practicing physicians, as the electronic health records get more standardized, if that ever happens, we can look at, in a big data kind of sense, two practitioners with kind of the same kind of patient cohorts, but one's providing much better care than the other. And we can read that off some of the electronic charts. The only problem there, as I mentioned at the beginning, oftentimes healthcare is a team event, and so making some sort of determination of the competence of an individual within a team setting can sometimes be difficult. So I think the physician's role, just as a discussion point, will be even more critical in regard to the best use of these technologies, their role as a health advisor, knowledge navigator. Certainly that your students coming through now will have to have a different skill set than perhaps you had when you graduated from medical school or did a residency 10 or 20 years ago. I think computer technology is not the problem, but the solution. Oftentimes people think that the physicians or other healthcare workers will be replaced by artificial intelligence. I just think that those who don't use this advanced technology will be replaced, but those who do use it will still be fine. The use of diagnostic management, data mining, and summation algorithms will drastically alter the medical education and assessment profession. And that's happening. It was happening before COVID, and it's continuing to happen now. That technology in the use of either scoring or developing tests is going to accelerate. And it'll, AI or artificial intelligence in medicine and assessment will be team sport predicated on a new set of competencies. So we'll expect some of our learners to be able to be more proficient in computer science and statistics. Certainly my daughter, who went and became a physician assistant, was much more adept at using technology or iPad or iPhone to look things up much faster than perhaps I could have done 10 or 15 years ago. So as the practice of medicine changes, so too must the assessment systems. It drives education, but hopefully in the right direction. AI will offer an opportunity to make assessments more relevant, valid, reliable, perhaps, and hopefully less costly. And I believe that COVID-19 accelerated the technological change that was already happening even a year and a half ago. I thank you for attention, and I'm not sure if there's questions at the end of this or at the end of John's talk. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Jack, for the wonderful presentation. That was so enlightening. I don't see any questions yet, but we will wait till after John kindly gives us his very important talk as well, and then we will open the floor for any questions for both of you. I just want to introduce my good friend John Norsini, who is an amazing mentor and an amazing figure as well. I came to know John in FAMER when he was the president of FAMER Institute of FAMER Philadelphia. And ever since then, he has been a constant support in all our endeavors. He's always ready to share his experience and expertise whenever he is invited. John is actually a good part of the FAMER Institute program. Not only that, he's also a very important figure in the FAMER Kiel Master, in the joint FAMER Masters program that exists with Gulf Medical University, I think. And of course, he is an honorary fellow for the Royal College of General Practitioners in UK and the Academy of Medical Educators, and he has received numerous awards, including Karolinska Prize for Research in Medical Education. John, thank you so much for being with us, and I think it is time for you to start sharing your screen and say hi to the audience.
Thank you, Samar. That was a lovely introduction, certainly much better than I deserved. Let's see. There we go. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk today, and I am delighted also to have the opportunity to follow my good friend, Dr. Boulay. I want to start out by giving you just a little bit of background about where this talk came from. So about a year and a half or so ago, the Association of American Medical Colleges created an interest group for the senior education leaders in the US. And they met for the first time in January of 2020, which was just before COVID-19. And one of the topics for that meeting was challenges and opportunities in assessment, and I had the opportunity to talk about that. They invited me back, hard as it is to believe, in June 2020, which was after COVID. And they basically asked me what were the impacts of that on assessment. So what I'm going to do today are sort of put together the two talks that I gave in terms of what I thought the challenges and opportunities were before COVID, as well as afterwards. And with Jack, I certainly agree that this offers a heck of an opportunity. And in fact, I'm sure many of you have seen the quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." I think that that accurately captures the moment. Unfortunately, when I tried to attribute this to someone, I found a whole group of people to whom this was attributed. Nonetheless, I think it's a great quote, and I think accurately captures where we are today. So what I'll do are sort of two basic things. First of all, I'll talk about the roles of assessment, which I view as quality assurance, signaling and motivation, and support for learning. And then I'll talk about the challenges and opportunities both pre and post-COVID in terms of summative assessment, formative assessment, and systems of assessment. So the first role for assessment, I think, is quality assurance. It's the one we're certainly most familiar with. Assessment ensures competence when it's used for decision making. So it establishes whether students have the necessary knowledge, skills, and attitudes given their point in training. This role for assessment is absolutely essential. It's essential to protect patients. It's essential for institutions because it establishes their accountability, and is central to the process of improving quality. So the first role of assessment is quality assurance. Second role is signaling and motivation. So assessment has a significant effect in terms of signaling to students what's important and what you value. And it motivates students to prepare. If you tell students something is on a test, they will prepare for it. The downside of this is that if their assessment is not done in a particular area, it ends up being destructive. If it's not included in assessment, it implies that aspect of competence is unimportant. So this is a role for assessment, but it's a role that has both opportunity and danger associated with it. And finally, assessment can be used to support learning. It is the basis for feedback, and feedback has a huge effect on learning. So a wonderful set of meta-analyses of meta-analyses done by a guy named Hattie in Australia. And he basically, this was for elementary and secondary education. So he had literally thousands or tens of thousands of students and thousands of schools and teachers. And he basically wondered, what are the greatest drivers of achievement? And what he found was that feedback was among the biggest. And in fact, there's something called an effect size. Effect size of 1 is a standard deviation. That's a huge effect. We rarely see it in educational research. Feedback alone had an effect size of 0.8 or 80% of a standard deviation. So it's a huge positive effect on learning. Unfortunately, feedback has historically been very limited, especially in clinical settings. So there's a real opportunity there to improve the quality of education. But not only does assessment work in terms of giving feedback, it actually creates learning. So a wonderful series of studies by Rodecker and Karpecki, a group out of the University of Indiana. And what they did is they took a reading passage and gave it to a group of students. They asked the students to read the passage, randomly divided them into 2 groups. One group read the passage 3 more times. The other group took a test 3 times, didn't get the scores on the test, just took a test. And when they tested them again, a couple of weeks later, they found that the group that had been tested 3 times did much better than the group who just read the passage 3 times. So the idea here is that in order to learn, it's not good enough just to take things in. You have to practice retrieving them or taking them out again. So assessment creates that opportunity. And these research results have been replicated numerous times since the original work, and certainly within health professions education as well. So they're the 3 roles. And what I'll do now are talk about some of the challenges and opportunity, starting with summative assessment. Summative assessment is the most common form of assessment. It's assessment for decision making, sometimes called an assessment of learning. When I was a young man, which was more than a few years ago, anytime anybody did assessment, it was for summative purposes. It was for making a decision. And so summative assessment has 2 of the roles I just described. One is quality assurance, and the second is signaling and motivation. So pre-COVID, the question I asked the group in the US was, do we really need all the summative assessment that we're doing to protect patients, establish accountability, and monitor quality? Virtually all assessment in the US, and it may be different where you are, but most of the assessment in the US, vast majority is done, and the information from that is used to make decisions about people. Second question I asked is, while there's lots of good research around summative assessment, there's not quite as much about whether the measures we're using ultimately relate to later performance and then to quality of care after training. So pre-COVID, I thought the opportunities that existed were to reduce the number of summative assessments and to create a shared research agenda focused on the efficacy of summative assessment. And in fact, what I talked about was the possibility of creating educational data repositories across medical schools that could be used to link with later performance and consequently do research that can't be done really at this point at individual medical schools. So what about post-COVID? As Jack mentioned, the challenge post-COVID is that it is really difficult and resource intensive to conduct secure examinations. So in my view, that's actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity to reduce the amount of summative assessment we're doing only to those that are essential, and also to reduce the amount of resource we spend on summative assessment. So I actually think that, as Jack said earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic, the crisis, has really given us an opportunity, and that opportunity is to limit a lot of what we're doing around summative assessment to only that which is essential. Second thing I want to talk about is formative assessment. And as I said, I think this is an underutilized form of assessment. So it's assessment that supports learning, sometimes called an assessment for learning. And among the roles I mentioned earlier, the role of formative assessment is to enhance and create learning. So pre-COVID, there were a series of challenges around this. First of all, there isn't a very rich research literature on how to do it well. What we end up doing for formative assessment often is exactly what we do for summative assessment, and we provide a little feedback for it. But there's not a really good research literature on how to do it well. And as a consequence of that, faculties and institutions aren't expert in creating it. The other challenge, certainly pre-COVID, is that there are a series of resource constraints. We only have so much faculty, only so much time. And what ends up happening is that folks end up using summative assessment, giving people a little bit of feedback based on it, and calling it formative assessment, and it really is not. In order to do formative assessment well, I think it needs to be divorced from summative assessment, and I think it needs to be designed specifically to support learning. The final challenge pre-COVID is that students and faculty don't necessarily value it. In many institutions I've been in, when students are offered the opportunity for formative assessment, they sometimes skip that opportunity because it doesn't count in the grades and they don't see it as important. So pre-COVID, I thought one of the things that would be useful would be a shared research agenda across the schools in the US. Basically intended to establish the characteristics of effective formative feedback and how to do feedback properly based on it. Also, research on how to develop motivation in both learners and faculty and enthusiasm for formative assessment. In addition, I thought that formative assessment, much more than summative assessment, offered the opportunity for sharing resources. The exams and the assessments that are developed don't need to be secure in any way. As a consequence, things can be shared across institutions, as can faculty development. So I thought that there was a real opportunity for shared resource. Post-COVID, what the schools in the US and I think in other places have been struggling with is an increased need to support learning at a distance. And I think formative assessment fits directly into this. So I think an increased use of formative assessment as a learning tool fits into the current environment where there's a need to support more learning when students aren't immediately seeing each other and in the context of traditional educational enterprises. The other thing I think is that the resources that can be saved by reducing the number of summative assessments can then be shifted to formative assessments. So we don't need to generate additional resource for this. We can shift the reduction in summative assessment to formative assessment. Last thing I'll talk about are systems of assessment. So several exams are required in most educational settings. And the way we treat them at this point is as a sort of a collection of pieces. There are a whole series of different assessments. And we've developed very sophisticated means for evaluating individual tests. But we don't think of them from the perspective of a system. That's been relatively uncommon. And I think thinking about them from a systems perspective means thinking about the relationships among the pieces of the system, each of the individual assessments we currently do. It means thinking about the boundaries of the system and how it interacts with the systems around it, including the evaluation of the educational enterprise. The stakeholders in the system and what they need are thought about more directly, I think, from a systems perspective, as is feedback. So I think that what a system means is thinking much more broadly about where assessment fits in the entire environment of the educational process. And I think there's some real advantages to this kind of system thinking. The first is optimization. If you can consider how the pieces of a system fit together, it offers the opportunity to be more efficient. There are huge redundancies in what we do, huge waste of resource in terms of doing the same thing over and over again. And I think thinking from a systems perspective allows that to be optimized in several ways. I think it offers the possibility for different kinds of analyses and for different ways to put together assessments across the various components of the educational process. I think it encourages a broader view. And it lets us and encourages the creation of a larger feedback system that helps to actually identify some problems before they exist and ultimately correct them. And it also expands the possible solutions to problems. It's not just an individual course and what assessments are appropriate in that. If there are problems that can be extended across courses, it gives you insight to those kinds of synergies. A wonderful famed fellow from Brazil, Valdez Balela, helped work on a series of criteria for good assessment and systems of assessment, and he developed this absolutely wonderful illustration that I think captures it more beautifully than I can in words. Figure 1.1 is where there's no point of light is no assessment. Figure 1.2 is a single assessment tool which shines a point of light. Where we are right now is in figure 1.3, where there are multiple assessment tools, but they're not coordinated in any way. And hopefully in figure 1.4, what you see is a system of assessments which coordinates those activities and can shed more light ultimately on the sorts of evaluations and assessments we care about. So pre-COVID, it seemed to me that the real challenge is that systems thinking is not often applied to the design of assessments. We don't necessarily or naturally think that way. In addition, there's limited expertise and very few successful models. And in many schools in the US and around the world where I visited, many of the assessment processes are decentralized. Basically, faculty are told to develop assessment for their own course, and there's no way to synthesize that or to systematize that across the various courses in a curriculum. So the opportunity from my perspective pre-COVID was to begin to share experiences, effective examples of systems thinking, doing faculty development in the area, and beginning to develop some best practice models around systems of assessment. I think the challenge post-COVID that I've seen here and I've heard about in other parts of the world is that medical schools are being forced to redesign portions of their curriculum. Especially around clinical clerkships and clinical experiences, but across a whole range of the curriculum. So there's significant redesign going on. And in my view, this is the ideal opportunity, the ideal moment to consider systems of assessment in the context of this redesign. I've seen many schools over time, as they redesign the curriculum, they redesign the curriculum independent of assessment, and assessment is kind of an afterthought. I think that this really offers the opportunity, the moment offers the opportunity to redesign the curriculum with assessment integrated into that redesign process. So to summarize, I talked about 3 roles of assessment. First, signaling and motivation, second, quality assurance, and third, learning. I think the challenges and opportunities of a post-COVID world are actually very positive, as Jack said. I think there are real opportunities to reduce the amount of summative assessment we do to only that which is essential, to take those resources and spend them on developing good formative assessment, which supports learning and helps in a distance learning kind of setting. And finally, it offers the opportunity to think more broadly about assessment in terms of a system and how that system integrates with the rest of the curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John, for the very enlightening talk. We learned a lot about the systems of assessment, and I think this is a very important reflection point that we need to reflect on. And maybe you are right, the post-COVID challenges that we are facing are an opportunity actually to focus on assessment in light of the systems in which we function, rather than the sporadic initiatives that we are trying to grasp onto and hold onto in order to maybe replace existing assessment modalities that we cannot achieve at the moment. And maybe I want to take this and focus a little bit, maybe pose a question at Jack. Jack, you mentioned that we have been, you have been seeing a lot of online OSCE in the past, even before COVID-19. And I'm really interested in understanding how this is, I mean, very, very broadly, but understanding what the different initiatives are in this area. And just before I give you the mic to answer that, I just want to ask the audience to please pose your questions in the Q&A section. We do not have an unmute function for the audience, so please write down whatever it is you want to say, and I will be keen to pass it on to the panelists. Jack, the floor is yours.
Yes, well, thank you very much. There have been virtual OSCEs around for, I looked going back at least 20 years. One of the issues, though, is some of the things that you might be able to measure in a virtual OSCE format may not be the same things that you could measure if there was a live encounter between the provider and the standardized patient. So probably a good idea for communication skills, maybe something to do with clinical decision making if you had some sort of exercise after perhaps interviewing a patient, and you could write a clinical note. The problem being, things like physical examination, it's
Procedural
impossible to.
skills.
Yeah, I mean, you could, the Medical Council of Canada is converting their qualifying examination part 2 to a virtual format, but the problem being is you're measuring some different stuff. So I could tell you what physical examination maneuvers I would do, but that doesn't mean that I can necessarily do them. And so it's a different construct being measured. I think we have to realize that in this kind of environment, there's going to be nothing's perfect. And so doing something that has some meaningful assessment parameters, communication skills is better than doing nothing at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you so much for making this clear, Jack. Thank you for elaborating on the fact that this is an alternative for a crisis situation, and it's not the future actually, unless it is capable of assessing and measuring what we want it to measure, because I get really frustrated when I see people referring to this online transformation, especially in assessment, as the future. It is maybe in some parts, but we have to admit that there are other areas that we need to find valid solutions for, and just shifting them to online format is not, it's just not doing the job as it should. That's in my point of view. And we have been looking for alternatives all over the place, and I don't see anyone who has managed to get this done the way it should be done, actually. Thank you for that, Jack. And John, may I pose a question at you, as well as we have a little bit of time left, so maybe we can tap a little bit more on your expertise in the area of assessment. And you highlighted a quote, and I love this quote actually, that I'll say it again just to make sure that I memorized it, but never let a good crisis pass. What? Pass on?
Go to waste.
Go to waste, yes. So in order to make this crisis not go to waste, what do you think? We've been seeing like Amy Guides coming to life, and people like bringing out a huge body of research that maybe speaks about individual practices. But how do you think we can solidify the experiences that happened in trying to find alternative solutions for assessment? How can we actually make sure that these become quality practices of the future, as they say, in order to make sure that we spent the last year not in waste, but maybe in paving a plan for the future?
Yeah, I actually don't think they'll go to waste. I don't think we can go backwards at this point. I think that the exposure of the various educational institutions, students, faculty, to the sort of online education that we've been doing recently won't go away. I think it'll reduce to some degree, but I think going forward, what will happen is that it will be used appropriately in terms of education going forward. So I don't think we go backwards. I think the changes have been too profound, and I think that it's been, it's a tragedy, of course, but there are good things in a tragedy as well. And I think the changes to our educational process, and in some ways the changes in the delivery of medicine, are positive changes that I think we'll take forward with us.
Yes, and we do have a question actually in the panel, in the Q&A section, that I will pose for both of you at the moment, in just a moment, but I just need to maybe ask an elaboration of what I just asked John. John, we are used to having, or we're used to being told that the way you teach is the way you assess. What are we going to do now? How are we going to get this right now? Because actually this kind of alignment is not easy at the moment. So what do you think would be the best solution for the situation we are in? Can we teach one way and assess a different way? Will this work? Will this be valid? What are your thoughts on that?
So I think that as I said, I think there's a real opportunity for formative assessment here in terms of making sure that the teaching and the assessment are the same, that they're intimately linked. I think there's also an opportunity to separate the sorts of summative assessments we do away from courses, and to begin to think about that from a whole curriculum perspective. So I think that in terms of teaching, I think formative assessment needs to be intimately related to it and needs to be consistent with it, needs to support it, needs to encourage it, needs to create it. But I think the sort of summative assessment we do in terms of courses and clerkships is in many ways ridiculous. I think some of the things we can do there, I at least know in many countries, when I see what they do with clerkships, which is every clerkship gets a grade, it really doesn't make any sense. You really want a grade for all the clerkships together. So I think that there are ways to begin to think of assessment for summative purposes in a different way.
Yeah, thank you, John. And Marwa, I can see Dr. Fatma Al-Mahmoud. She has a comment, but unfortunately we don't have the unmute option for the mic. So if you will kindly just type it in, I will be keen to read it to the panelists. But at this moment, we have a question from Dr. Marwa Ashur, and she's asking about whether you think the assessment systems that John spoke about, they are something that can be implemented in sectors like dentistry, and that we need to focus on with dental students. And I'll pose this question to Jack first.
Yeah, I agree with John. I mean, there's a movement towards more ongoing assessment, and I think the issue becomes how to aggregate that up to some summative decision in many respects. And so whether we're talking about programmatic assessment or through the clerkships, how do we add those things together to come up with some decisions about whether it's progression from the third year to the fourth year or something else. And I think there are models now that are being developed that would allow for that. And I do believe, as John believes, that a proper sets of formative assessments chained together that are linked directly to the curriculum will get everybody up to the same point, regardless of what they have to do as some sort of final summative exam. So it's changing, and maybe it goes. A lot of the licensure exams have been canceled. I don't think that's a great thing, but as the pandemic fades out, I think some of those things will actually come back because their value for determining competence has already been established.
Okay, thank you, Jack. John, do you have any reflection on dentistry students specifically as well? Is there a difference?
No, I actually don't think there is. I don't think there's a difference anywhere across the educational continuum at this point. I think that the sort of fundamental principles of education are the same. The fundamental principles of assessment are the same. So I think it applies to dentistry. I think it applies to all the health professions. And I think it applies even more broadly than that.
Yes, and actually, I like this question a lot. It's kind of a good segue to our coming session, which will focus a lot on the area of interprofessional education and development. Dr. Marwa was asking again, John, what about practical assessment? Is it different when we deal with dental students than medical students? Are there separate challenges? Do the same ideas work?
So I think they do. I have had the privilege throughout my career of working occasionally with dental colleagues, and my sense is that the skill set is fundamentally the same. That there's knowledge, there are procedural skills, there's dealing with patients. All the competencies are the same, and I think likewise for many of the health professions. So I really think there's an opportunity for synergy across the health professions in terms of thinking from a systems perspective.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't know, Professor Safinez, are you with us? No, I don't think she is. So we have 2 minutes left. So just
Yes,
Dr.
Summer?
Safi. Yes, Dr.
Yes,
Safi.
yes, I
Any
have a
comments?
question. Yes, Anna,
please,
I have a
please.
question, Summer.
Go ahead.
Do you think, for any of them, do you think that increasing the percentage of oral exam would solve in part the problem of distance assessment? We used to decrease that part of the exam. So what's your opinion?
I'll answer. I mean, it kind of depends on how well you do it. I mean, oral exams have their flaws. My score should be a reflection of what I know or what I can do, not necessarily the stringency or of the particular evaluator. So I'm not fundamentally against some of those things if they're structured correctly. But there I think there's a place where with some automated, whether it's quality assurance or scoring routines, we could get rid of some of that measurement error and get a more fair evaluation of each particular candidate or examinee.
I agree with my esteemed colleague in this regard, and would only add that I would probably not think first about methods of assessment. I would think first about what you want to assess. And methods of assessment are an answer to that first question. And they might be fine or they might not. It depends on the situation.
Okay, thank you so much, John.
No, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Safi. Now, Professor Safinez, thank you. I just want to take one word of wisdom from both of you just before we close this session. A final word that sums it all. John.
I wish I had some wisdom that I could share in one word. I think that we need to think about this as an opportunity to do what we do better. And as we come out of it, to take the things that we've had to experience, take the positive pieces of that and apply it going forward.
Thank you, John. Jack?
Well, at one point this pandemic will be over and we'll certainly have opportunities either to modify what we assess or bring back some of the in-person techniques that we've been using before with that had, great psychometric properties. So I have some faith that eventually we'll get back to having the full toolkit of, at least performance assessments sometime, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jack. And I do know that Janet, at one point, they had a project of a completely online medical school. So I don't know if Janet is still with us or not, but it would have been really, yes, here she is. So it would be really useful, Janet, if you could tap on the area of clinical skills assessment and how that was maybe managed in that kind of program.
Yeah, the difference actually is that this wasn't an online school. This was a distributed medical school, distance learning. But in a distributed medical school, what we actually did was to map all of the available facilities in the healthcare service that were unused. We would have distributed students through those so that they actually were learning in being attached to clinical sites. And then what we had planned was to replace anything that was a lecture or library work or so on with distance learning methods. But it meant that assessments of, say, clinical skills could happen on site in different places. The challenge then is the quality assurance of those clinical assessments to make sure that they are equivalent from one place to the next. But I'm sure that John and Jack will tell us that that's not beyond the wit of people to make sure that you have equivalent assessments in different places that are properly quality assured. So you have to have a concept of distributed students, but also of a distributed school, which of course is what you've got anyway. You've got students all over the place anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big difference. Any comment, John or Jack, on that before I? Okay, so I'm gonna read Dr. Fatma. She wanted to contribute, and unfortunately we don't have the unmute option available. So I'll read out her comment. Well, she started with the keyword of change, as you said in this session. And for me, first of all, we need to change the mindset of the policymaker of the assessment. So the mindset of the policymakers is important to change as a first step. We really need to depend on the self-assessment and the impact assessment as well. When we conduct a survey for asking the learners about the impact of exam upon them, and the results will be terrible. There will be an anxiety, etc. So we need new approaches to the assessment. And I think, Dr. Fatma, thank you so much for that. I think this kind of resonates a lot with what we have been hearing from John and Jack and Janet during this session. So thank you so much. With this said, I think we are 1 minute past our session. So we have done a good job of trying to keep our time and still getting as much of your wisdom as possible. So thank you so much, John Norsini, Jack Boulay, for being with us today. We do understand the value of the time that you have given us. So thank you so much for that. Dr. Safi, would you like to close the session?
Okay, thank you, our dear speakers, for this very, really comprehensive assessment review post-COVID. And definitely, we will make use definitely of the recommendations set by you. And now it's time to move to the third part of the session, Dr. Samar.
Yes, absolutely. And we do have our esteemed speakers with us. We have Professor Siraj Ali and we have Professor John Gilbert, both of whom are experts in the area of interprofessional education and development. And we have them with us today because they will be speaking in the area of faculty development, which is something that we can, we as FAMER fellows and FAMER faculty can really relate to. And I think Siraj will give us a good tour of what that entails in terms of faculty development and how this reflects on faculty development. So John, I think, John, can you please, yes, here he is. John, you know how to unmute? Do you know how to share your screen?
I'm going to try to share screen.
Yes, but just before you do that, I want to let people know who John Gilbert is, because John Gilbert is from the University of British Columbia. So he's with us from all the way from Canada today. And it's quite early, I think, where you are now, John, but thank you so much for waking up early to be with us. And he has his vision leadership led to the concept of interprofessional education being developed as a central tenet of collaboration, person-centered practice and care. So we are not just speaking or listening to someone speaking about interprofessional education. We are speaking to the person, the best person who can ever speak about interprofessional education and development, John Gilbert. So I will leave the floor to John and take it away, John.
Okay. I now have to
John, from the bottom of the screen, there is the share button, which is green.
Yeah, I'm sharing and it says desktop share, but then it's sorry. Well, good morning from Vancouver, where it is raining.
John, we cannot see your screen.
No, I know. I'm trying to do that for you right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. So do you need help?
I'm in system preferences of iMac and I'm looking at screen recording. And it should be...
Why are you doing that from outside the Zoom screen?
No, well, when I do the share from Zoom, share Zoom screen, says desktop 1, and then I go share. Usually this works.
Yeah. So what's happening?
Here's sound. Optimize, okay, share.
Dr. John?
John,
Yep.
I can share it for you if you want.
Dr. John?
Yes.
John Siraj here.
You will find the share screen button at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, I know that.
Yes,
I know that. But unfortunately, when I tap on share screen, it doesn't work. Now, it just so happens that my wonderful friend and colleague happens to have my slides. So Siraj, if you could share
I'll
your
do that.
screen with my slides, that would be
Sure,
very technically wonderful.
Okay, we'll do that.
Okay. My apologies. Usually I can handle this with no problem whatsoever. And I guess something is amiss.
So,
There we go. Good. Is that good enough, Samar, or does he need to share his whole screen?
That's perfect.
Okay, we're looking for perfection, but we very scarcely achieve it. So this is great.
Yeah.
Well, good morning. I'd like to tell you that this morning I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Musqueam peoples in Vancouver. All my relations. It's a great pleasure to be here to talk with you today. The title of the talk is The Future of Interprofessional Faculty Development Post-COVID-19 from a medical education perspective. And I will confess immediately, if we could go to the next slide, please, Siraj. Good. We have been living through very, very tough times. And the thought of how to teach new faculty and old faculty how to collaborate interprofessionally when the stresses on the system are so enormous is a very interesting problem. I'm reminded of a story that is about a prime minister in the United Kingdom at the end of the 19th century. And it was a very troubling time. And there were many things that needed change. And his assistant came to him and said, Prime Minister, you know, I think we really need some changes. And the Prime Minister looked at him and said, change? Why do we want change? Don't we have enough trouble already? And so we're kind of at that stage where we're saying, oh my gosh, you know, we've struggled during this past year to cope with a complete upside down of our educational and our clinical systems. So I just want to lay that out as kind of a background to the comments I'm going to make. We all know that faculty development is important. Sometimes we don't know why it's important. We're told that we need faculty development, but I think it's important to kind of rehearse these issues. First of all, faculty development develops the capacity and the capability of faculties for performance improvement as educators, teachers, clinicians, and researchers. Now, historically, some very interesting changes occurred at my university, the University of British Columbia, about 35 years ago, when global evaluation systems of universities began to emerge, and we found ourselves at the bottom of the list. And when we looked at the surveys that were done, we were constantly told your teaching is terrible. It's just, the students hate it, you know, you have lousy teachers, etc. And our university went through a complete awakening to what faculty development should be about. Because of course, the University of British Columbia, which is one of Canada's top 3 research-intensive universities, wanted to be in the top 3. And so we established the beginnings of a faculty education program, faculty development by another name. And that has proven to be incredibly successful and incredibly important. Successful in that our new faculty and sometimes older faculty are required to take courses that teach them how to teach. And when I think back to when I started in teaching more than 50 years ago, nobody had taught me how to teach. So it's been really successful. So we have, in fact, developed the capacity and the capability for faculties to improve as educators, as teachers, as clinicians, as researchers, because this teaching extends across all of those domains. Secondly, what we discovered was that it really does generate reflection about roles as teachers, as researchers, and as being a health professional. And this past year, as we have grappled with online courses, online platforms of all varieties, there has been considerable reflection about the role of a teacher as opposed to the role of somebody who is now facilitating teaching in breakout rooms, for example. And that's been incredibly important with respect to learning how to collaborate together. And I'll come to that in just a moment. Thirdly, it really does reinforce or alter attitudes or beliefs about education and instruction. So what we've noticed is that as our teachers have been taught to teach, it's reinforced the belief that actually this is not a bad thing. We used to have complaints from students in math that they never saw their teacher's face because he or she or they were constantly facing the blackboard. But now, the notion that that's a very poor way of instructing has come across and been reinforced as something that is not desirable, but what is desirable is these new ways of teaching. So it has reinforced our attitudes and certainly our belief that educational instruction is critical, and a number of talks at this meeting are vitally important with respect to that. But also that as those attitudes, as those beliefs kind of get to a stage of development, of maturity, then we can see new ways of using technology, which is not going to go away now. Samar said it absolutely right. We're going to have this mix, but if we are going to be engaged in trying to collaborate interprofessionally, this is a huge opportunity to rethink some of the ways in which we teach. And ultimately, of course, what we did at my university, I think, is to achieve the vision and the mission of the university. Sometimes people say to me, you know, if you have a vision, you maybe should go see a doctor. But, you know, we do have a vision, as you all do. We all have a mission. And what it's done is to say, we want to ensure that when people look at us from a distance, they understand and see that this University of British Columbia really does value teaching and learning. It's not all about research, although we are, as I said, a highly intensive research university. Could I have the next slide, please, Raj? So how do we foster its important need? Now, the two Johns that preceded me have made some very interesting comments on this. You have to value faculty development in promotion and professional advancement. You know, if we're going to talk about faculty development as being an essential component of the learning institution, then we have to make sure that when we are looking at our professoriate in terms of their promotion or in the clinical sphere in terms of their professional advancement, that the way that they have interacted in the development process is valued and credited, all right? And that means that we have to establish some very clear policies and rules to facilitate and support faculty development. And that took an enormous amount of work in my institution because we have 12 faculties, we have innumerable departments, and trying to be clear about what those policies and rules are for facilitation and support took an enormous amount of verbal, vocal, written interaction. But you have to have those policies and rules in order to facilitate good faculty development. And then faculty development has to be committed to from the president down to the person on the front line. And it would be erroneous to think that faculty development is only about faculty. If you think about our support systems within the universities, all of the secretarial, managerial, etc. support, they're also part of quotes, unquotes, faculty development, because they too have to understand why it is important that their people in whatever department or faculty they are engaged in these exercises. Could I have the next slide, please, Siraj? Siraj?
Siraj?
Oh.
I don't know what happened to Siraj.
Okay.
He stopped sharing his screen and resharing it.
No, I'm here, but something
Slide
is.
4.
I'm here. Yeah.
Okay.
1 second, I'll reshare it.
Okay. Well, so my next slide is about how do you ensure that faculty development is in fact effective? And you may say, well, I thought he was going to talk about interprofessional. Well, this is the basis for really good interprofessional faculty development as we move post-COVID. So you have to have a well-designed plan. Now, if you look at the people who are engaged in teaching and learning with our students, what we find is that we have this incredible spread of knowledge, huge spread of knowledge. But knowledge by itself is not sufficient to carry faculty development forward effectively. We have to put that knowledge together with experience. So a well-designed plan not only recognizes the knowledge of those people who are engaged in faculty development, but also their experience as, say, engineers, as nurses, as members, professional members of the health and social care professions, right? So we have to, it's not sufficient just to think about the knowledge that's necessary. We have to think about what is the experience that makes faculty development effective. And secondly, we have to be sure that when we are engaged in faculty development, that the topics that we are using, talking about, etc., are relevant. And sometimes I have seen faculty development where it is totally irrelevant, and they have to be practical. It has to be something that our faculty can use. As much as I am a theorist at heart, theory does not make effective faculty development. So that the practical topics are, for example, thinking in the interprofessional sphere of diabetes, COPD, head injury. Those are very practical topics around which interprofessional faculty development could and should be built. Now, we've heard in the prior talks about assessment, and I think that this is incredibly important. If we wish to measure how far faculty development has proceeded, we have to be sure that we are using an assessment of the participants' performance that is appropriate, task appropriate, and effective. It's not sufficient to simply tick the box and say it's there. We have to be sure that we know that this, in fact, is an effective assessment of that participant's performance. And then we need to use knowledgeable resource persons who can involve everybody. And again, that sounds kind of obvious, but when I was thinking about just the example of diabetes, for example, we would immediately, I think, those of us who are here at this meeting would think about the usual team: a physician, a nurse, a pharmacist, a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist. We would think about the regulated professions in my culture, the regulated professions who gather around that particular individual with diabetes. But there are other resources available that would help an understanding of diabetes beyond the information that those regulated professionals have. And one of those, of course, is just thinking about the space in which diabetic patients live, and particularly if they have severe diabetes, and the need for an architect to say, you know what, I don't think this home is going to help this person at all. So we need to think about knowledgeable resource persons that can, in fact, involve everybody. And then use a variety of training methods, and we're all familiar with what those would look like. And then the facilitators. And I'm not going to have enough time to talk about the facilitation. I think that Suraj will do that. But when I say competent, I really mean competent. So a facilitator has to understand, and I'm going to get to it in the next slide, has to understand what the definition is of interprofessional, but also what the competencies are that the facilitator is attempting to facilitate. So if I could have the next slide, please, Suraj. So there is a definition which is now kind of universally, globally agreed on from the Center for Interprofessional Education in the United Kingdom. It was developed over quite a period of time, and its almost final appearance was in 2002, but it was modified again in 2017, and I'll come to that. Now, I can read many times about interprofessional stuff being done. There are lots and lots of stories that appear on my Google search every day. And I think, do those people know what interprofessional is? First of all, take the hyphen out, because word always hyphenates interprofessional, and it has a very special meaning when we apply it to health and social care, all right? So interprofessional are occasions when members or students of two or more professions. Now, let's be clear, we're not talking about intra-professional when, you know, the anesthetist is talking to the surgeon. That's not where we're at. We're talking about two different professions, members or students. And it's important to understand why we have members. That's because we do try to carry this interprofessional perspective directly into the practice environment. And then the students, of course, because they are learning together in order to work together. So the first piece of this definition is learning with, from, and about each other. Now, this seems so obvious when we say it, you know, of course but I tell you, I've been at team meetings at discharge when one person in the discharge team simply doesn't understand what other members in the discharge team do, how they're trained, what it is that their scopes of practice are, etc. So learning with, from, and about each other is absolutely critical. Now, I have a very good friend. He was a pediatric neurologist, and he's a great vocalist for safety. And he was one of the first people in Canada to develop a safety checklist for pediatric surgery. And I went to see him when this list was kind of moving along and was almost complete. And I said, well, tell me one thing that you've learned. And he said, John, you know, those people used to be around the table and we'd start the operation, but none of them knew anything about each other. So I said, next operation, you are going to tell the person on the left of you what your tasks are here and who you are. And he said it made a huge difference because people around the table were no longer afraid to blow the whistle and to say, do you realize we've left a sponge inside? So learning with, from, and about is absolutely critical when we think about faculty development post-COVID. And why? Because we know that when you know about those people, your capacity to collaborate just climbs. Because you know, oh, X does this, Y does that, Z does this, and I only need to do A. Think of the times, for example, when a patient will come in and 8 different health or social care professionals will take a case history. Think about it. We need to know about each other so that we can improve collaboration when that does not happen. And why ultimately are we concerned? Because we want to improve the quality of care and services. It's not just about care. It's about the services that are necessary to support the patient in wherever they are, whatever they are, environment. And we could just throw in a very quick word about the determinants, the social determinants, and the importance when we think about quality of care and services within the context of this, about the social determinants and how they have to be seen within this context. So interprofessional education denotes a continuum. It's education, learning, practice, care. Education, learning, practice, care. It's not just one thing. Could I have the next slide, please? So a major problem that we confronted was, what are the competencies that are associated with this interprofessional activity? And are they different from the competencies we would expect from a health social care provider just within their regular training? And so the Canadian Interprofessional Health Collaborative, which I founded many years ago, wrote a competency framework that was published in 2010 and is now under review, because the competency framework is trying to identify for those facilitators that we talked about earlier what it is that we really want them to concentrate on when they are bringing a group of different health social care professional students together, so that they do get a true understanding of interprofessional collaboration. So things like conflict resolution, collaborative leadership, team functioning, role clarification are central to this notion of interprofessional collaboration. So when we think about faculty development for interprofessional education, collaborative practice, we think about how we instruct, how we teach the facilitators about this competency framework. And the competency framework is intimately linked to the definition I just gave you. So the definition leads to us understanding how do these competencies have to be taught to facilitators so that they can facilitate faculty development, but facilitate learning within practice environments. And I'll leave it there. And could we go to the next slide, please? So you probably are aware of Yvonne Steinhardt. I mean, her classic model has been used and will be used, I'm sure, for many eons to come. It is an extremely good model. And I think that the difference that I would see in Steinhardt's schema that we have here is that we are not really looking at mentorship as much as we're looking at facilitation. Now, there's a line that we could draw between those two concepts, but nonetheless, if you just take out mentor and put in facilitator, then all of these pieces of this quadrant are absolutely essential. So the faculty development approach from informal to formal, for example, from individual to group is the same when we're thinking about faculty development for interprofessional education. And I would, if you are not familiar with Yvonne Steinhardt's article, I would recommend it. It's still a very, very important and very useful mechanism for thinking about how you are going to build the facilitation, faculty facilitation around interprofessional education. And so if we could just go to the last slide, because I think I'm just over time, please, Siraj. So it's a long and winding road. You know, my ideal, it will not be realized for at least another 100 years, I suspect. But Henry Ford, the great automotive maker, said, coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. Interprofessional education for collaborative, people-centered practice and care is about this definition. Thank you for your attention, all my relations.
Thank you so much, John, for the very important introduction to interprofessional development, which I am sure Siraj will build upon very eloquently. I know Siraj, and we've worked together a lot. But thank you so much for all the concepts that you have introduced, John. And we will leave any questions till after Professor Siraj's talk. Over to you, Professor Sophie.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Samar. Now it's time for Siraj Ali. This professor is the Deputy Director of the Center for Continuing Education and Interprofessional Development, and the Professor of Microbiology of Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He's a fellow and the global faculty of the Famer Institute. He has got actually 4 awards starting too early. The first one was 2006. That was offered to him by the by the American Society of Microbiology. The faculty was under the name of Early Career Award. Then 2010, he got the Honorable Mention Award. 2011, the UNESCO Award for International Education, and lastly, 2012 Outstanding Mentor Award. Lots of awards, Professor
Don't
Siraj.
worry, I think I'm going to start. Thank you for your kind words.
You're welcome.
Because only thing that I want to say here is I'm also a faculty at the Ain Shams University, the Famer Mina Fry.
Yes.
Okay, so it's wonderful to be here, and especially when you have your mentors on this panel, quite a number of all these faculty who spoke to you, people who I consider them as mentors, and they are people who have actually shaped the way even I think many times I've thought about it. Now, let's get into what I'm expected to do in the next 20-25 minutes or so. It's basically an extension to John's talk, again, from someone whom I learned the ABCs of interprofessional education and practice. Well, it's a different ball game. To me, it's a contrast. Interprofessional education and medical education many a time. The turf and tools remain largely the same, but the players have to go by a different set of rules altogether, unlike the ones that we often hear in the field of medical education. So, having said that, let me go to the the major aspect that I intend to share with you that John already mentioned about, that is faculty development that creates a group of people who would facilitate the whole process, you know. And I must tell you, based on my experiences, most things are based on my experiences. So I must tell you that if you have the liberty or the freedom to choose facilitators, then you are at a great position, but often you are not. Even when we started this, including people who actually laid foundation had no much idea about interprofessional facilitation. But over a period of, they say, 7 to 8 years, we have come to a stage of identifying who could be real interprofessional facilitators. That's why I put commitment to the role as the first one. You know, competence is something different, which we have been hearing from people all the way in this presentation. And there's a huge hype about competency-based medical education. But competency can be developed, mind you, competency can be developed with appropriate direction and support. It is not something that you're born with, though people might contest this. But commitment is something entirely different. It's a combination of confidence and motivation. And if you are able to get that right mix, you have a great interprofessional facilitators. Also remember that a sound knowledge base is essential in the facilitation aspects and the work that you're doing. Now, when I say comprehensive clinical expertise, many of these things that we do, not exclusively, but there are so many things that will require clinical acumen in an arena that is expected to be highly collaborative. So your ethos, your culture has to be collaborative. And if someone who doesn't believe in collaboration, if someone who doesn't believe in working together, somebody who feels that teamwork means just a few concepts, no, that's not for you. You are not going to be an IP facilitator. So skills of facilitation is something that we emphasize when it comes to faculty development. I've just put some of the most important skills that we actually have identified over a period of years. The first one sounds simple, but you know that how difficult it is to maintain an optimal learning environment. Many of my friends who do medical education often keep repeating about a safe learning environment, but I'm sure that at least 80% of them find it difficult to bring that into the settings that they work. So creating and maintaining an optimal learning environment, you need to make your faculty I won't say trained, but at least aware, and then have their own ways to create an environment that can promote it. Then comes people-centered care. This is a huge thing, but I will just mention here, are you preparing your faculty to treat people with dignity, compassion, and respect in faculty development programs? You know, so that is the core. Next is explaining the essentiality and emphasizing the essentiality. Both are different. While there are people who can speak for hours altogether, write about the essentiality, we find that in their own settings, they have not been able to demonstrate this. So that is emphasizing the essentiality, and it generally translates to practice. You need to walk the talk. And then comes one of the most important thing, which John, mentions every now and then. I'm referring to John Gilbert. Judicious use of terminology consistently and correctly, because here everything sounds easy. And when you are in a profession, your fancy terms, some of the you unknowingly likely to hurt people who are working with you. And sometimes the whole teamwork concept can collapse. So there is a lot of unlearning in those skills that you're trying to bring. And needless to say that all these things are based on frameworks of certain teaching, learning, and philosophies, which of course is not the topic that we're going to address, but it is important to know that there are frameworks, underlying frameworks. Now, in interprofessional facilitator, if you look at skills of facilitation, we are all familiar to a whole lot of generic skills, which need not be mentioned here, which we have learned over a period of time. But when it comes specifically to interprofessional facilitation, I would rate this as number one. Are you in a position, or do you do faculty development where people find themselves empowered for articulating their role expectations. Role clarification is one of the most important aspects when it comes to interprofessional education and practice. So it becomes a very important aspect even in faculty development. Then comes, how skillful are you in opening the channels of communication? Healthcare delivery sometimes has resulted into very horrible consequences just because certain channels of communication were closed. Had it been opened, we would have saved a patient or probably would have had a better outcome. And that is a skill that needs to be. Many a times we say that we do this in our medical schools or schools of health professions, and of course try to assess this. But I don't think we have reached a situation even now where people can effectively communicate in teams, specifically in the context of healthcare delivery. Then comes feedback-informed process. Feedback-informed treatment is something that you would have heard about. It's a theoretical approach for evaluating and improving the quality and effectiveness, specifically in the behavioral aspect of health services. So it formally solicits feedbacks regarding all those alliances that you have, specifically in healthcare delivery. So these skills are extremely important when it comes to IP facilitator or interprofessional skills of facilitation. I will just share with you some of those big challenges that we had when we started training people for interprofessional facilitation. The first one was people questioning the relevance by itself. And we had to evaluate, is this a real threat or is it perceived? Because there were people who asked, what is the big deal of actually putting people together? And as John just now mentioned, what is the big deal that you get when you try to bring students, learners together to talk about teamwork, communication? So what is the relevance? So that was the first challenge. Then the one that I mentioned to you, use of discipline-specific jargon is very common in health professions. So when you have people from other professions, we often found that either they were inhibited, there were people who did not open up. Then comes the biggest problem. I mean, I'm talking about an Indian context, but by and large, things are same, the hierarchies. So it was interesting again to relate and to find and analyze where these hierarchies were real one, or is it that people perceive that these hierarchies are there, and because of these hierarchies, there are problems that arise in healthcare delivery. One of the common things that we had to face is the expertise. When you have expertise coming from diverse profession, you often see that it is conflicting, not only in terms of the values they represent, many a times, procedural, process-related principles. So this was another challenge that was to be addressed in the skills for facilitation, specifically for interprofessional facilitators. I don't have to tell about this more stereotyping. Is it just professional, or some professions are often given more weightage in a scenario that you often experience, and there are times when other professions feel belittled. So again, it is the patient who is at the receiving end. Now, when it comes to education, one challenge that we face is you have participants at different levels and stages, because you're trying to bring students from medicine, from pharmacy, from nursing, and sometimes allied health, sometimes dentistry, depending upon the themes that are being identified. And at which levels are you going to? You can't have a uniform division, or you can't have a criteria where you will say that this level. So that is something that has to be chosen, and that is again a part of interprofessional facilitation, because it is the person who will decide to get the best outcomes as far as educational outcomes are concerned. Now, it will be injustice if I don't talk about the current scenario, because things have gone online. Online facilitation skills are equally important. We tried this for the first time with a cohort of students, and it is interesting to see that there are similarities, but there are also differences. At the outset, tell your faculty to be prepared for flying blind. you will not have access to many of the sensory skills you use in the face-to-face setting. So consider how the foundation environment emphasized and mentioned to the group of educators. It is the pedagogy that has to come first, not technology. Of course, be it andragogy or heutagogy or whatever you want, but it is the learning that has to come first, because the more complex it is, the more likely there will be bumps that is going to be with the flow. So in that case, you will need to have contingency plans to face the glitches, and you have to reserve adequate time. So these things have to be told as a part of faculty development, because many a times people just learn from these experiences, make mistakes, right? So then comes in online facilitation skills, you got to clarify expectations. It needs to be spelled out very clearly, multiple places, multiple times. Now coming to specifics, make sure that interprofessional education collaborative process gets its due. Sometimes in the process of online facilitation, there are chances that these important tenets do not get addressed. So as a faculty, or when you're doing the faculty development related to online facilitation skills in interprofessional education, look to connect process elements to the task, to deepen collaboration, to enhance team development, and also understand that learners may be drawn to relatively safe structure of a task because it's an unfamiliar online world. So you got to challenge and support them. And then comes the cardinal truth that it will take some time. The interprofessional group process will take a long time. Allow that extra time for learners to find their way in this new world. So you will have to watch for signs that the group is feeling comfort. Are they asking questions? Are they disagreeing each other? Are they taking leadership? A whole lot of things have to be. I was actually intrigued with one of those models that was set in early, it was in 2009, Garrison, who put up this community of inquiry. We know about communities of practice. You heard some of our speakers talking about this. An educational community of inquiry is a group of people who will, collaboratively engage in a meaningful discourse. But here in community of inquiry theoretical framework, online especially, put forward by Garrison, the learning experience comes through 3 interdependent elements. Now, these 3 interdependent elements are very important to take note of. Number 1 is the social presence. Social presence is the ability of the participant to identify with the community, whichever community that you have put for a purposefully in a trusting environment. Then comes teaching presence. This is something that relates to us in the design, the facilitation, direction of cognitive and social processes for the purpose of realizing meaningful learning outcomes. So that is the teaching presence. And then, of course, cognitive presence is where, to the extent to which the learners are able to construct and confirm meaning. And that happens generally through reflection. So if you look at that, when they merge, that is where you have these online communities of inquiry, which actually make a difference. Now let's move on to the diverse roles where you got to give faculty development, or give importance to the faculty development. So interprofessional facilitator, that's, I just put it IPF, the educator. So in terms of education, the faculty development is training to really how do you teach them basic things. So the levels, based on our experience, we started off in a very very basic levels, where it was not a practice-based setting because we could not go directly, and so we had these people coming together from diverse profession, and it was more of informal settings. People talk to each other, very introductory, and people said that, oh, okay, I mean, what are those virtues that that this type of intervention will result in? What are the different models that we can look at? So that is very introductory. So when you're doing a faculty develop, initiating the presence of a facilitator, it happens in the first rudimentary part is basically giving them introductory, non-practice based. That then you move on to the ones that you give for the individual as such. There are certain things, the skills that I mentioned to you, and it has to be paced and phased in a manner that the person gets the best out of it. And when you have this group of people ready, we moved on to the practice-based aspect. That is where you had, people talking about these things related to diseases as such or conditions, social determinants, a whole lot of things happen. That is practice-based. The role of, I just put it BLs because I have a mentor there who is, who will say these are fancy stuff. So it's for you to decide. You could put a C there, you could put a B there, you could put, so C of course is case-based learning, you could put problem-based learning. But what we want to mention here is whatever BLs you do, it is very important to see that how do you actually make this facilitator provide a learning environment where students can ask questions, the questions that basically, because creative thinking, reasoning, these are all buzzwords, that is very fancy words that people would like to use. But when you're really in a practice setting, you will find that how difficult it is to facilitate a group of students coming from diverse professions. So that is something that has to be mentioned. Coming to assessment, we have assessment experts, Jack and John are here, but the methods are entirely different because you're going for an entirely different skill set, looks for collaboration, looking for teamwork, looking for role clarification. There are instruments available, but again, the setting, the context, as Janet always says, is extremely important. It is no tool by itself is going to be valid or reliable for this. So you got to weigh your settings. Training for evaluation is equally important because these programs have to be evaluated against the health outcomes, and they largely hinge into community-based approaches also. And finally, as an educator, how do you train? How do you actually make them become the ambassadors of interprofessional education? That's in a nutshell about the educator. There is also interprofessional facilitator, the academic leader. How do we create opportunities for learning together? So how do we actually lead and co-lead integrated knowledge translation strategies? So for that, you need to empower your teams. Now, most importantly, an academic leader in an interprofessional setting got to reward collaborative practices because many of these things have just not come out. It's not a default stuff. It is by design, and there are people who have toiled, so they need to be rewarded with the collaborative practices, what they have put forward. Now, this is also very important. We have seen that there are certain things that can be related to your own systems, systemic issues. And I don't want to mention about those things. It's different in different settings. But if you don't address this, the whole idea is going to collapse. So as an academic leader, so you may have to give faculty development of probably conflict resolutions and, things like that, where they address systems issues that can impede interprofessional education. Then comes interprofessional facilitator, the change agent, because you're going to bring in a whole lot of innovations. And some of these are curricular. And when you talk about curricular, it has to be concentrating on what is being taught to health professions learners, to meet the evolving demands. We know that we are in a situation where we found that, the best way to perhaps tackle this crisis was coming together. Whether you call it interprofessional or intersectoral, that's a different thing. But it was very clear that collaboration and cooperation was the most importantly and most significantly and mostly used words in combating this pandemic. Pedagogic innovation, how information can be better taught and where this education can take place. Cultural elements, and this is extremely important when you talk about context. Now we should be aware of who is being taught. You can't have global parameters when it comes to these things. The context is extremely important. So who is being taught? What works in Canada, like John Gilbert, who actually proposed the whole thing, IPE. But when we started doing this in the Indian context, we found that many of these things had to be completely relooked into. So there are radical changes that comes along with context. So cultural elements, and then addressing the design and development. Human resources for health. Now, this is the capacity that you're looking at. How do you innovatively expand it to get an adequate supply and mix of educated health workers based on, I repeat, based on local needs? It's not what is important is those brains that leave you, but people who stay there and who work for, and these people are health workers who are educated based on the local needs. And finally, you should also be looking at the metrics, something that is very important. How do you measure these, learner assessment and evaluation? So why I put this under change agent is these things are still receiving, still not received enough attention to see that. So the person who is actually promoting this or working for this is a change agent, be it innovations, the cultural aspects, human resources, or defining or developing the metrics. So there is a whole lot of creating cultural change, So you got to integrate policy matters, and this itself is a big stuff. So that has to be based on scientific inquiry, which you would have made it locally. So evidence informs collaborative practice and care. So it is something that has a foundation which has come from scientific inquiry, and the collaborative practice and care is based on the policy is actually integrated into the policy matters. Finally, John has touched on these aspects about organizations, but I'm not going to. So we talked about individuals, the way they have to be, made facilitators. When you talk about organizations, we see that, sorry, three important things. One is the commitment, stakeholders at all levels so that they collaborate and facilitate the faculty development. And that has to be the mission and vision of the organization. Then comes organizations have that collective responsibility, for recognizing and so that people benefit from high quality faculty development programs. Organizations have the responsibility to ensure that the trained health professionals are practice ready. This is just not something we are doing out of, somewhere some concept has come and you want to do it. No, absolutely no. You want practice ready and job ready professionals. Well, this is something we often hear when we talk in our own context, but who is going to do this? Who is having resources? We are already constrained with, I'm not going to talk about this slide. It does, but I'll just read it out. It doesn't matter how many resources you have. If you don't know how to use them, they will never be enough. And finally, I just want to talk about, the leadership aspect. You heard Janet talking about distributed schools, distributed, students. This is distributed leadership. Distributed leadership, it's again, could be a fancy term you may call delegatory or whatever it is, but what works best is distributed leadership, empowering people to the core, and you will see that it works, especially you can understand how the work of leadership takes place among people in the context of complex organizations. So this is something primarily used in education research, but in a distributed leadership model, leadership responsibilities and accountability are shared by those with the relevant skills and expertise rather than resting with an individuals. So there is a pool of talent that is being used, and you would have heard of Peter Sang's learning organization in the making. So whole lot of good things, synergy in the environment, ethical climate, culture is democratic. So if your faculty development, this is based on our personal experience because we were fortunate enough to have a distributed leadership throughout, when we evolved the whole, not only the systems, but the entire interprofessional faculty development, I feel did happen in Manipal because of the distributed leadership that we enjoyed. And finally, not to bring the framework, I'm not a big fan of these frameworks as such, but if you look at this, if you look at anticipated outcomes of interprofessional faculty development, you will see that at the very base level, you have positive reflections. That is what you anticipate, wishful thinking. You will discuss the approaches which are deeply rooted in collaborative practice. You will role model collaborative behaviors, basically, in practice settings. You will demonstrate unique skill set of facilitations of interprofessionalism. Then you will collaborate, at the highest level. What you will see that it might even go to the strategic planning of your organization. And I would say that being ambassadors for interprofessional collaborative patient-centered practice is what is that we are looking at the results section. And finally, let's be very clear that changes are going to be slow. Observe those slow changes. Factfulness, as Hans Rosling says, a small change every year can translate to a huge change over decades. Recognizing that many things, including people, countries, religions, cultures, they appear to be constant because the change is happening slowly. And remembering that even small, slow changes gradually add up to big changes. Keep track of that gradual improvements, and you will see that your faculty will evolve. Update your knowledge accordingly. Talk to your grandma if you want to be reminded of how values have changed. Think about your grandparents' values and how they differ from yours. And there are enough examples of cultural changes. So with that positive thought, I want to conclude this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Siraj, so much for the amazing talk. Professor Safinez, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Siraj. Thank you, Dr. Samar. Thank you, John, Gilbert, also for this, the two really very focusing and very comprehensive presentations. I like the Steiner model of John, and I like the challenges mentioned by Siraj. We have to work on every item mentioned in the slide. Thank you, Samar, for moderating such an amazing, really, session full of topics that covers post-COVID assessment, international collaboration, and finally, the faculty development. Thank you for all the attendees. Thanks for all the speakers. Thank you, Samar.
Thank you so much, Professor Safi. I don't know if Paige, if you have any comment, Paige, I know you were eager to listen to John and Siraj, so I'm anticipating that you have something you want to add before we close the session.
I just wanted to thank you for both of your presentations. This is such an important area that we need to move much more aggressively, assertively towards.
Yes.
Absolutely. So,
and Samar, I must say, for many of those qualities that actually, if you want to look at one person and study that's Paige, you don't have to see so many people for collaboration. And
absolutely.
This is based on my personal experiences, you don't get, and John is another noble soul who has been so kind enough to help us in our, entire the journey of the Institute. We are, indebted to the kindness that he has shown to us.
Yes, absolutely. Paige, really, you have been, a change agent for all of our lives and the lives of many fellows who came through the FAMER program. So we really want to thank you for that. And I just want to reflect on the values of the interprofessional development that do exist in the FAMER program that we are running different chapters of. Siraj would be running the Manipal Institute, and I'm running the MENA, the Middle East North Africa Regional Institute situated in Ain Shams University. And we are both revolving around all these concepts, trying as much as possible to be as inclusive as possible and to build our programs on all the elements that make interprofessional development what it is supposed to be. So hopefully with the help of the amazing people who are attending this session, we will begin to see more applications applicants from the schools of dentistry, the school of dentistry, pharmacy, and nursing school. We really want to see more of our nursing colleagues becoming a part of this program. But we have just come to the end of our day. I just want to highly give lots of thanks first to our panelists who joined us in the first session, Paige, Janet, Bill, and Professor Ashraf Omar, who were of highly, I mean, they gave highly valued views in the area of collaboration and international collaboration, especially in the post-COVID era. So thank you for that. And then, of course, Jack Boulay and John Norsini, who came in with lots of amazing views and important views in the area of assessment, which is a challenge for all of us educators post-COVID-19. Thank you for that. And of course, we summed this all up with faculty development and the concept of interprofessional development offered to us by John Gilbert and Professor John and Professor Siraj Ali, who are both experts and have the necessary hands-on experience in that area. So thank you so much for giving us a lot of your wisdom today. Thank you so much for all our speakers. And I'm not sure if Professor Ashraf Omar is still with us, and if he would like to close the session, or if he is not. Professor Ashraf? Okay, so I'd like to bid you all good night. Thank you so much for being with us, and thank you, Janet. Thank you all, and hopefully we will see more of you in coming events of Ain Shams University. Thank you so much. Have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.